watched my progress, their eyes seeming to judge whether I was worthy of the name I carried. I had spent the last decade proving myself in the corporate world, building my own successful investment firm far from the family's influence. Now, circumstances had drawn me back into the web of Blackwood politics. The library doors opened to a scene of barely concealed tension. My Uncle Richard, my father's younger brother, had deliberately chosen to sit in grandfather's favorite armchair. His wife Patricia perched beside him, her perfectly maintained appearance betraying no sign of their re-day flight from London. Their son Maxwell lounged against a bookshelf, his casual pose contrasting with the sharp attention in his eyes. Across the room, my father Harrison Blackwood IV sat rigidly in a leather wingback chair, my mother Eleanor beside him. The strain of the past month had left its mark on both of them. "Well," Uncle Richard broke the silence, "shall we proceed with the reading? Some of us have businesses to return to." I moved to the center of the room, feeling the weight of expectations pressing down on me. "Before I open this, there's something you should know. Grandfather asked me to serve as executor of his estate." The reaction was immediate. Richard's fingers tightened on the armrest, his knuckles whitening. "That's absurd. I'm the family's attorney. I've handled all our legal matters for 30 years. "Nevertheless," I replied calmly, "it was his explicit wish. The paperwork was filed last month." I broke the seal on the envelope, the sound sharp in the tension-filled room. The document inside was surprisingly brief for a man who had built a billion-dollar empire. "I, Harrison Blackwood III," I began reading, "being of sound mind, declare this to be my last will and testament." The initial provisions were standard: charitable donations, provisions for long-term staff, specific bequests of personal items. Then came the core of the matter. The majority of my estate, including controlling interest in Blackwood Industries and all associated holdings, I leave to my granddaughter, Victoria Eleanor Blackwood. The silence that followed was deafening. I continued reading, keeping my voice steady despite the shock rippling through the room. "She has demonstrated the qualities I consider essential for leading our family's legacy into the future: integrity, innovation, and the courage to stand apart from the crowd. To my son Harrison, I leave a 20% stake in the company and his current position as CEO, provided he works in good faith with Victoria. To my son Richard, I leave a 15% stake and the choice to continue as corporate counsel under the same provision." Uncle Richard surged to his feet. "This is outrageous. She abandoned the family business years ago to play at being an entrepreneur. I've dedicated my life to Blackwood Industries." "Exactly," I replied, holding up a second document. And grandfather knew exactly what that dedication entailed. I placed a thick folder on the coffee table. "This contains detailed records of every questionable transaction you've orchestrated over the past 5 years, Uncle Richard. The offshore accounts, the manipulated contracts, the strategic losses that somehow enriched your personal holdings." I watched the color drain from his face. "You're bluffing. Grandfather wasn't just testing your loyalty these past few years," I continued. "He was building a case. He knew someone was bleeding the company, but he needed proof. So he created a perfect trap, appearing to decline mentally, seeming to lose his grip on the business. You took the bait." Maxwell pushed away from the bookshelf. "You can't prove any of this." "Actually," my father spoke for the first time, "we can. Victoria brought this to my attention 3 months ago. We've been working with forensic accountants to document everything." I saw the shock ripple through the room at the revelation that my father had known, had been working with me. Harrison Blackwood IV had always seemed to be under his brother's influence, deferring to Richard's expertise in all things financial. "Why?" Aunt Patricia's voice quavered. "Why would Harrison do this to his own son?" I opened another document. "Because family legacy isn't just about blood, Aunt Patricia. It's about trust, about integrity, about building something that lasts beyond personal gain." I began distributing copies of a detailed report. Grandfather spent his last years teaching me, testing me not through direct instruction, but by creating circumstances that would reveal everyone's true character. While you thought he was losing his grip, he was actually orchestrating the most important succession plan of his life. Uncle Richard snatched the report, his hands shaking as he read. "This would destroy us if it got out." "It doesn't have to," I replied. "Grandfather left you a choice, Uncle Richard. You can accept the terms of the will, return every penny you've diverted, and continue serving the company under proper oversight. Or you can fight this, trigger a very public investigation, and watch everything you've built crumble. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked away precious seconds as Richard stared at the documentation of his crimes. Finally, he sank back into his chair, defeated. You're more like him than any of us realized. I thought about the long conversations I'd had with my grandfather in this very room, discussions that had seemed casual at the time but had actually been carefully crafted lessons. He taught me that true power isn't about control or manipulation. It's about responsibility, to the company, to our employees, to our legacy. Over the next several hours, lawyers were called, documents were signed, and the shape of Blackwood Industries' future began to emerge. I would assume control gradually, working with my father to ensure a smooth transition. Richard would remain as counsel, but under strict oversight. Maxwell, after a private conversation with me, agreed to enter a management training program, earning his place rather than expecting it. That evening, as the family dispersed to their respective corners of the manor, I returned to my grandfather's study. Andrews appeared with a decanter of the special reserve scotch my grandfather had always favored. He would be proud, Andrews said quietly, pouring 2 glasses. He always said you had his mother's spine of steel. I accepted the glass, surprised. Andrews had never joined in a drink before. You knew about his plan, didn't you? Mr. Blackwood confided in me that he was setting up a series of tests, yes. But the choices were all yours, Miss Victoria. You proved yourself not by passing his tests, but by staying true to your principles even when you didn't know you were being tested. I thought about the path that had led here. Leaving the family business to build my own company hadn't been an act of rebellion, as everyone had assumed, but a need to prove I could succeed on my own merits. Every success, every failure had taught me lessons that would now serve in leading Blackwood Industries. To the old guard, Andrews raised his glass, and the new beginning. The next months brought sweeping changes to Blackwood Industries. I introduced new technologies, streamlined operations, and expanded into emerging markets. Richard, chastened by the exposure of his schemes, became a surprisingly valuable ally once he understood that his position now depended on merit rather than manipulation. My father flourished in his role as CEO, free from his brother's influence and supported by my innovative strategies. Our partnership became the talk of the business world, the experienced chief executive and the fresh-thinking chairman working in perfect harmony. 1 year after the reading of the will, I sat in what had been my grandfather's office, now transformed into a modern command center, while still retaining key pieces of its historic character. His portrait washed over me as I reviewed quarterly reports showing record profits and unprecedented growth. A knock at the door preceded Andrew's entrance. Miss Victoria, I found something while organizing your grandfather's personal effects that he wanted you to have when the time was right. He placed an old leather journal on my desk. Inside, I found entries dating back decades, documenting not just business decisions but the reasoning behind them. The final entry was dated just days before my grandfather's death. Victoria will find this when she's ready, when she's proven what I've always known. That leadership isn't inherited in the blood, but earned through character. The others see her independence as rebellion. I see it as the strength this family needs to survive another century. She'll face resistance, but she has what matters most. The courage to stand by her convictions and the wisdom to know that true power lies not in controlling others, but in empowering them to be their best selves. Tears pricked at my eyes as I read his words. He had seen my potential not despite my choices, but because of them. Every decision I'd made, from leaving the family business to building my own success, had been a step toward proving myself worthy of the legacy he envisioned. A message popped up on my computer, the announcement of Blackwood Industries' latest acquisition, a tech startup with revolutionary green energy technology. The stock price was soaring, but more importantly, the company was positioning itself to make a real difference in the world. My phone buzzed with a text from Maxwell. Just landed my first major client for the new sustainability division. Turns out earning something feels better than being handed it. I smiled, thinking of how far we'd all come. Richard had transformed from a secretive schemer into a valuable advisor. Maxwell had discovered his own path to success. My father had emerged from his brother's shadow to become the leader he was always meant to be. The rain had returned, drumming against the windows just as it had the day the will was read. But now it felt less like an omen and more like renewal. I stood walking to the window to watch the grounds of Blackwood Manor emerge from the mist. The estate had stood for over a century, but its true strength lay not in its granite foundations or iron gates. It lay in the principles that had guided 3 generations of Blackwoods, principles that would now guide us into a new era. Andrews appeared at my elbow with a fresh cup of coffee, my grandfather's special blend, which I'd acquired a taste for over the past year. "Your grandfather used to stand here," he said quietly, watching the rain and planning the future. He said the best leaders don't just think about the next quarter or the next year. They think about the next generation. I nodded, thinking about the changes I'd implemented, the foundations I'd strengthened, the bridges I'd rebuilt within my family. He taught me that legacy isn't about preserving the past. It's about building a future worthy of it. I returned to my desk, where another acquisition proposal awaited my review. The world was changing rapidly, and Blackwood Industries would change with it, guided by the principles my grandfather had instilled: integrity, innovation, and the courage to forge new paths. His portrait seemed to approve as I began reading, those painted eyes holding the same twinkle I remembered from our many conversations in this room. He had given me more than just a company. He had given me the chance to prove that true inheritance wasn't about bloodlines or birthrights, but about the values you chose to uphold and a legacy you chose to build. As the day drew to a close and the last of my staff headed home, I remained in my office, adding my own entry to my grandfather's journal. "Today marks 1 year since you entrusted me with our family's legacy. You taught me that true leadership isn't about wielding power, but about using it to empower others. Every decision I make honors that lesson, building not just a stronger company, but a stronger family. The others finally understand what you knew all along, that our greatest inheritance isn't the wealth or the property or even the company. It's the wisdom to know that real success comes not from what we take, but from what we give back to the world." I closed the journal, placing it in the desk drawer that had held it for 3 generations of Blackwood leaders. Outside, the rain had finally stopped and the setting sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden glow over the estate. A new day would dawn tomorrow, bringing with it new challenges and opportunities. But I was ready, armed with the lessons of the past and a vision for the future. The legacy of Harrison Blackwood III lived on, not in the buildings that bore his name or the fortune he had amassed, but in the principles he had instilled in me, principles that would guide Blackwood Industries into a future brighter than even he could have imagined.
I'm Josie, and I hail from a quaint little place named Millstone, a tight-knit community where everyone recognized each other and the pace of life was unhurried. My parents, Max and Hadley, were pillars of virtue, instilling in me the principles of diligence and compassion. After graduating from high school, I craved a different scenery and seized the opportunity to attend a university in a bustling city, marking my departure from Millstone. The urban environment was a stark contrast, loud, vast, and swift-moving, unlike the tranquil town I left behind. Adjusting took some time, but I eventually found my footing, completing my studies and securing a job at a reputable company shortly after. Initially, I kept to myself, spending most of my time engrossed in work or exploring new technological trends. I enjoyed the solitude, especially after the loss of my parents during the pandemic, which was a tough period for me. I ended up selling our family home in Millstone and purchasing an apartment close to my job in the city, creating a fresh beginning for myself. Among the few possessions I took with me was a cherished painting by a renowned English artist, a family heirloom gifted to my great-grandmother that provided a comforting reminder of home. Work consumed much of my time, but I also launched a YouTube channel focused on information security. Surprisingly, it gained traction, attracting viewers who sought advice on protecting their personal data and securing online accounts. One day, I received a message from Daniel, a viewer who appreciated my content and had questions about online security. Our conversations evolved from professional to personal as we shared details about our lives, hobbies, and aspirations. Daniel eventually suggested meeting for coffee to continue our discussions in person. Apprehensive about meeting someone from the internet, I hesitated, but his sincerity won me over. We met at a cozy cafe near my apartment, and the connection was instantaneous. Daniel was just as personable face-to-face, sharing his passion for marketing, hiking, and his dreams of globetrotting. As we delved deeper into each other's worlds, our bond deepened. Daniel's humor, charm, and genuine interest in my endeavors were refreshing. I found myself eagerly anticipating our conversations and get-togethers, which blossomed into a meaningful relationship. One evening, as we strolled through a park, Daniel complimented me, saying, "Josie, you're amazing. I've never met anyone like you." Flattered and a bit shy, I thanked him, feeling grateful for the wonderful turn my life had taken. I enjoyed a fulfilling career, a growing YouTube channel, and a budding romance with Daniel that brought me immense joy. About 7 months into our relationship, Daniel thought it was time I met his mother. Nervous yet excited, I agreed, and we set off to visit her home in a serene neighborhood, ready to embark on this new chapter together. We rang the bell, and soon Amaya opened the door. She stood tall, her short gray hair framing a face with sharp, observant eyes. "Hi, Mom." Daniel greeted her warmly with a hug. "This is Josie." "Hello, Josie," Amaya said, her handshake firm, almost too firm. "Nice to meet you," I managed, offering a polite smile. We moved into the living room, settling down as Amaya offered us coffee. Returning with a tray, she took a seat opposite us and dove right into questioning. "So, Josie, Daniel tells me you work in IT," she started. "Yes, I do," I responded, trying to keep my tone light. "I'm with a company downtown." "And how long have you been with them?" she probed further. "About 4 years now," I replied, feeling the atmosphere grow a bit tenser. Amaya nodded thoughtfully before her next question caught me off guard. "And what sort of salary does a job like that pay?" I hesitated, taken aback by her directness. Enough to live comfortably," I said, looking to Daniel for some support. The remainder of our visit continued in a similar vein, Amaya meticulously inquiring about my financial stability. By the time we left, I felt completely drained. "That was intense," I remarked as we got into the car. "She's just protective," Daniel assured me, trying to lighten the mood as he started the engine. "She'll warm up to you." A year later, Daniel and I were married, and life began to settle into a new normal with us living together in my apartment. However, Amaya's intense curiosity about my finances seemed only to intensify. She would often visit, inspecting our home and commenting on any new purchases. "Oh, is that a new couch?" she'd ask curiously. "How much did that cost?" Initially, I brushed off her questions. "I'm not sure, Amaya," I'd respond vaguely. "I don't remember." But she persisted, scrutinizing price tags and even looking items up online as if on a personal mission to catalog my finances. "Why does your mom care so much about what I spend?" I finally asked Daniel one evening. "She doesn't mean anything by it," he chuckled, dismissing my concerns. "She just likes to know things." But to me, it was more than a minor annoyance. It felt invasive and disrespectful. Despite my efforts to establish boundaries, Amaya seemed oblivious, frequently dropping by unannounced, her visits stretching longer each time. One Saturday, hoping for a quiet day at home, I was interrupted by the doorbell. Opening the door, there was Amaya, smiling as if poised for a long visit. "Hi, Josie," she greeted. "Thought we could spend the day together." "Amaya, I need some alone time today," I replied, trying to be as polite yet firm as possible. "Oh, come on," she insisted, brushing past me into the apartment. "We can have some coffee and chat. It'll be fun." Reluctantly, I agreed, hoping she would soon take the hint. As we sat in the living room, Amaya prattled on about her recent projects, but my mind was elsewhere, pondering how to maintain my privacy without causing a rift between Daniel and his mom. Over time, Amaya's frequent and prolonged visits became more invasive. I gently suggested she visit less. "You know, Amaya, I really need some quiet time to work," I would hint, but she seemed not to understand, or chose to ignore it. Out of frustration, I began leaving the house whenever she arrived, seeking peace elsewhere. One day, as I slipped out to avoid another long afternoon, Amaya followed me. Catching up to me, she called out. Amaya suggested we grab a coffee at a nearby cafe to talk things through, hoping it might help ease the tension between us. We settled into our seats, and Amaya ordered some food for herself. However, when the bill arrived, she suddenly claimed to have forgotten her wallet. Reluctantly, I covered the bill, trying to keep my composure, though I felt a surge of irritation. Once we returned to my apartment, I couldn't hold back any longer. "Amaya, we need to talk," I began, striving to keep my voice steady. "You can't just show up, invite yourself, and then expect me to cover all the expenses." Amaya seemed taken aback. "I didn't mean any harm, Josie. I thought we were just enjoying some time together." "Enjoying time doesn't mean you taking advantage of my generosity," I countered firmly. "I have my bills and responsibilities to manage." Amaya left abruptly, clearly offended by the confrontation. When Daniel came home and I explained what had happened, he wasn't pleased with my approach. "Why can't you just be nice to her?" he protested. "She's my mother." "Daniel, she crossed a line today," I replied, exasperated. "She needs to respect our space and my boundaries." "You're overreacting," he dismissed. "Just let it go for now." Amaya stayed away for a while, which was a relief, but then I noticed something odd. The cherished painting from my parents was hanging crookedly in the living room. I always made sure it was perfectly aligned. Puzzled, I asked Daniel about it. "Oh, Mom took it to get it appraised," he nonchalantly replied, glued to his phone. She was curious about its value. I was stunned and immediately phoned Amaya, ready to confront her. But before I could speak, she chimed in brightly. "Josie, I was just about to call you. The painting is worth $600,000. We should consider selling it." "Amaya, it's my painting. You had no right to take it for an appraisal," I snapped, my temper flaring. "Oh, come on, Josie." Amaya's voice hardened. "Think of what we could do with that money." "No," I cut her off firmly. "Don't you ever touch my belongings without asking again?" Amaya fell silent for a moment before hanging up. When Daniel returned home, I told him about the call. "She wants to sell the painting," I said, still incensed. "So what?" "It's just a painting," he replied dismissively. "Just a painting? It's a family heirloom. It means something to me." I raised my voice, feeling my frustration peaked. "You're making too much of this," he said, clearly annoyed. "Just drop it." Determined to protect my possessions, I decided to move the painting to my office and set up a small camera for security, taking extra precautions to ensure nothing else went missing. One day, I came home early, something unusual for me. The house was quiet until I stepped into the living room and found Daniel and Amaya sitting on the sofa casually, as if everything was normal. "Daniel, what are you doing here in the middle of the day? Shouldn't you be at work?" I asked, surprised and confused. He looked up with a nonchalant shrug. "I quit my job," he said casually, as if it were the most normal decision. "You make enough for both of us." As Amaya nodded with a smug expression, it seemed they had orchestrated this moment together. "That's right, Josie. Why should he work himself to death when you earn plenty?" she stated with a sense of entitlement. A wave of anger and disbelief washed over me. "Are you serious?" I snapped. "You quit your job without discussing it with me, and now you expect me to support both of you?" Daniel stood, a grin spreading across his face, his calm demeanor almost taunting. "Well, yeah. And if we divorce, I'll need alimony." "Fair's fair. You make more than enough," he said nonchalantly. His words felt like a physical blow. This was their plan all along, to use me for financial gain. Stunned by the audacity, I found my resolve. "That's it. I want a divorce," I declared, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Amaya chuckled darkly from the couch. "Good luck with that, dear. We'll see you in court," she sneered, her voice filled with venom. Daniel casually picked up a duffel bag and began packing his belongings right in front of me. I was frozen for a moment, the shock mingling with painful clarity. The man I had married and his mother had been scheming against me all along. As Daniel walked past on his way to the door, he gave a mocking salute. "See you around, Josie." Amaya followed, her gaze sharp and hostile. "Prepare your checkbook," she taunted as they exited, the door slamming shut behind them, leaving a heavy silence in their wake. I slumped into a chair, my mind reeling from the rapid unraveling of my marriage. This nightmare was my reality. Shaking off the shock, I grabbed my phone and called Charles, a friend's husband and a lawyer. "Charles, it's Josie. I need your help. Daniel just left, and he wants alimony. And it's not just that, he planned this with his mother. I need to file for divorce, and it needs to be bulletproof. Charles's response was immediate and supportive, a lifeline amidst the chaos. I'm on it, Josie. We'll make sure you're protected. They won't get away with this. Filing for divorce marked the start of a bitter legal battle. The first court appearance was torturous. Daniel portrayed himself as the innocent victim, claiming he had lost his job and I had abandoned him. He painted a picture of being the perfect, supportive husband, all of which were lies. But the worst part came when Amaya testified. Your Honor, she began, her voice using fake concern, my son is a victim here. Josie treated him terribly. She controlled everything and made all the decisions, and now she's throwing him out just because he lost his job. She's a real domestic tyrant. I sat there, stunned by their blatant dishonesty. Charles, seeing my distress, stood to defend me. Your Honor, let's look at the facts. Daniel's story doesn't add up. Josie supported him financially and emotionally, and there's evidence to prove it. The claims of her being a domestic tyrant are not only unfounded, but also an attempt to manipulate this court. Despite our efforts, I could see that Daniel's emotional act and Amaya's feigned support had impacted the judge. As we left the courtroom, Amaya approached me with a smirk. You think you're smart, Josie, but just wait. You'll lose, and when you do, you'll be paying out for years, she hissed. Her words were chilling, but I steeled myself. This was not just a fight for my finances, but a fight for my dignity and truth. I took a deep breath, steeling myself as I faced her, defiance burning in my eyes. We'll see about that, I retorted, with Charles's comforting presence beside me as we left. The drive home was a whirlwind of thoughts. It was infuriating how they always twisted the facts, casting me as the antagonist in their warped narrative. Charles reassured me that we would counterattack, that we would unveil the truth. Yet, a part of me was gnawed by doubt. What if the judge sided with them? The looming court decision weighed on me heavily. Back home in the serene quiet of my living room, the threat of losing everything became palpable, and I was not about to let Daniel and his manipulative mother win without a fight. Driven by urgency, I called Freya. Her husband Charles, who was also my attorney, needed to hear what I had planned. Hey, could you and Charles swing by? We need to discuss the case, I urged her over the phone. When they arrived, we started off with some coffee, settling in before diving into the case details. Mid-conversation, Freya, eyeing a painting I had recently rehung, remarked, "Doesn't that look more vivid than before?" Turning to see what she meant, the colors did indeed seem unusually bright. A suspicion crept over me, prompting me to check the hidden camera I had installed in my office. I reviewed the footage, and there it was. A few weeks back, Daniel and his mother were in my office, acting suspiciously before they took down the original painting. Daniel then disappeared off-screen, returning with a different piece, which they hung up deceitfully. I turned up the volume, catching their scheming whispers. Once we swap this, she won't even notice. Then we can sell the original and split the money, Daniel plotted, with his mother's conniving laughter echoing. She trusts too easily. Once we file for divorce, I'll make sure you get alimony. She's just a gullible fool. Fury and betrayal welled up inside me. After taking a moment to compose myself, I walked back to the living room. You need to see this, I declared, my voice calm but firm. We watched the damning video together, their faces turning from concern to shocked as the deceit unfolded on my screen. After the video, a silent consensus filled the room. Charles finally spoke, resolve in his voice. This is it. This is the proof we need to win in court. We spent the day strategizing. Charles meticulously prepared the legal arguments while Freya helped organize the evidence, ensuring everything was set for the upcoming trial. As they left, Charles reassured me, with this evidence, the judge will definitely see the truth. The next court date loomed ahead, a mix of apprehension and resolve fueling me. We were armed with the hidden camera footage, ready to expose their fraud. As the judge called the session to order, Charles wasted no time. Your Honor, we have video evidence critical to this case, he declared confidently. The judge allowed us to proceed, and as Charles connected the laptop to the projector, a hushed anticipation fell over the courtroom. The video played, unveiling the calculated betrayal right there in my home office. As the video ended, revealing their deceit, Daniel and Amaya's faces went pale. The court fell silent, the weight of their exposed schemes settling over everyone present. The judge struck his gavel sharply, announcing a brief recess to further examine the evidence, stirring a flurry of whispers among the crowd. When the court resumed, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. The judge returned to his bench and promptly declared his readiness to deliver a verdict. With authoritative certainty, he stated, the evidence presented clearly demonstrates a deliberate attempt to defraud the plaintiff, orchestrated by her husband and his mother. His stern gaze swept over Daniel and Amaya as he continued, therefore, I am granting the divorce in favor of the plaintiff and ruling in her favor in all matters of this lawsuit. But the judge wasn't done. He turned to his assistant, instructing, please call the police. We need to address a theft case here. My heart raced as police officers entered the courtroom and approached Daniel and his visibly distressed mother. Amaya, tears streaming down her face, cried out about her debts driving her actions as the officers handcuffed her. Daniel remained silent, his face a mask of shock and defeat. They were both escorted out amid the murmurs of the onlookers. The judge then addressed me. Miss Jenkins, the painting will be returned to you. I apologize for the ordeal you have endured. As I exited the courtroom, the mixed feelings of the day washed over me. The victory was clear, but the sight of Daniel and his mother being led away left me with no joy, only a sense of solemn justice being served. Later, celebrating the end of this tumultuous chapter with Charles and Freya, I contemplated the future. What will you do now? Freya asked, raising her glass. I smiled, feeling a newfound purpose. I'm going to focus on my YouTube channel and expand it. I want to share my story and help others who might be facing similar battles. I'll turn this experience into something positive. 3 years after the courtroom drama, I had settled into a routine. My work as an IT specialist was fulfilling, and my YouTube channel on data security and personal resilience was thriving. One evening, as I finished a video on cybersecurity, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Curiosity led me to answer. It was Daniel, his voice hesitant. Hey, it's Daniel. I just wanted to let you know that my mom and I are out of prison. We're in a rented place now. It's cramped, but it's something, he said, his voice tinged with awkwardness. I paused, processing his unexpected call. Okay, I replied coolly, wondering what he could want. I was thinking maybe we could try again? Start over. His hopeful tone held a hint of desperation that didn't sit right with me. A laugh escaped me, disbelief and amusement mingling in the sound. You've got to be kidding me, Daniel. After everything, you really think I'd take you back? I could almost hear his hope waning over the phone. We were good together, weren't we? Before all the legal stuff, he persisted. Shaking my head, even though he couldn't see, I cut him off. Daniel, listen. You betrayed me. There's no going back from that. The finality in my voice marked the end of that conversation, and perhaps the final closure I needed from that chapter of my life. After ending the call, a wave of empowerment washed over me. It was a clear sign that I had moved past the old ties that once held me back. Those who had tried to pull me into their deceitful plans no longer had any hold on me. As I turned back to my work, I realized that this incident was not just a personal victory, but also a compelling story worth sharing on my channel. It wasn't just about the recent call, but the entire ordeal that had unfolded. I set up my camera, ready to share a different kind of video with my viewers. Hey everyone, I started, my voice firm and confident. Today, I want to talk about something a little different. I'm going to share a personal story of how I discovered a serious betrayal and fraud in my life using a hidden camera. I went through the details of setting up the camera, what it had captured, and how crucial it was in my legal battle. This is why staying vigilant is so important, I concluded. Technology can be a powerful ally in protecting ourselves from those who seek to deceive and exploit us. After I uploaded the video, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Messages of support poured in, along with stories from viewers who had encountered similar situations. It was evident that my experience struck a chord, offering not just a warning but also a message of strength and resilience to others. This experience, though challenging, underscored the importance of being proactive and cautious, even in personal matters. It also reminded me of the broader impact of sharing our stories, to educate, empower, and connect with others facing their battles, showing them that they too can overcome and safeguard their lives. Working within the upscale furniture industry introduces you to a wide array of characters, but Gabriel was a standout from the start. Every Thursday, punctual as ever, he would wander into the showroom, coffee in one hand and sporting a crooked grin that seemed to declare his ownership of the place, despite never purchasing a single item. I still vividly recall the day he first came in. I was meticulously setting up an array of luxurious Italian leather sofas, the kind with price tags that would make your eyes water. Gabriel meandered over, eyes flicking over the tags, not with the typical shopper's intensity, but with a casual curiosity. "Hey there," he initiated, inching too close to a lamp priced higher than most folks' monthly housing. "What's the scoop with this one? Looks comfy enough to sleep on indefinitely." I couldn't help but smirk, stepping in before he had a chance to test his hypothesis. "It's handcrafted, top of the line. Certainly not intended for naps, though." Gabriel let out a chuckle, ruffling his tousled hair. "Guess I'll keep my shoes off it then." Our conversation that day was mostly one-sided. Gabriel was full of questions about the furniture while I tried to discern if he had any intention of buying. He didn't. He left as casually as he arrived, promising to see me around. One particularly slow afternoon, Gabriel strolled in again with his characteristic nonchalance. The store was quiet, leaving me no escape from a prolonged chat. "So, Nora, do you ever tire of discussing sofas and tables all day?" he asked as I leaned against a counter, arms crossed. "It pays the bills," I replied. "Besides, it's not too bad. What about you? You're here often but never buy. Are you in the industry, or just enjoy teasing me?" His laughter echoed warmly. "I'm not here to tease. I just like the atmosphere, and, well, you're quite entertaining." That day, he lingered longer than usual. We delved into a myriad of topics, from music to mundane daily experiences. Each brought out lively opinions and colorful stories from him. When he finally left, he paused at the door. "Hey, Nora, how about coffee sometime outside these extravagant confines?" I hesitated, unsure about mixing personal with professional, but then agreed. "Sure, why not? But if you're planning on starting a tab there as well, I'm bringing a calculator." "Deal," he replied with a hearty laugh, and then he was gone. Coffee outings with Gabriel quickly became our routine, selecting quirky cafes as unique as the furniture he browsed but never bought. Each meeting felt like a continuation of an endless conversation, weaving seamlessly from one subject to another, from future aspirations to personal dreams. A year since our initial coffee date, our interactions had evolved into a series of small adventures. Beyond just coffee, we ventured on road trips, indulged in late-night movie marathons, and sauntered through Sunday flea markets. Gabriel's authenticity made every mundane moment feel significant. Then, unexpectedly, during a simple picnic in the city park, just us, some sandwiches, and the open sky, Gabriel proposed. I nearly choked on my drink as he knelt, presenting a ring that gleamed with the sun's rays. "Nora, will you marry me?" he asked, his eyes brimming with hope. My laughter was a mix of nerves and joy. "Are you serious right now?" "Dead serious," he affirmed. "I want all my tomorrows to start with you." His honest gaze was like a child awaiting the verdict on a carnival game's grand prize. I didn't hesitate. "Yes, Gabriel, of course, yes." Meeting his family was the next step. Gabriel had spoken of them, but we hadn't yet spent time together. Gabriel had always hinted that his parents were a bit strict and formal, so when he suggested it was time for a proper introduction, he planned a dinner at their eclectic home. Upon arriving, the house was a spectacle. Every nook crammed with various fancy artifacts from different eras and styles, like a museum where the exhibits had somehow gotten jumbled. His mom, Madeline, greeted us with a chill reminiscent of the brisk November air. "You must be Nora," she observed, sizing me up as if I were an unusual addition to her collection of curiosities. "Yes, nice to meet you," I replied, doing my best to keep my composure under her scrutinizing gaze. The dinner atmosphere was tense. Gabriel made an effort to keep things light, but the air remained thick with stiffness. His father, Lincoln, only warmed up slightly when Gabriel brought up my job at a high-end furniture salon. "So, you work with expensive designer furniture?" Lincoln inquired, his tone peeling away from disinterest to a flicker of curiosity. "Yes," I responded, "I assist people in choosing pieces that enhance their homes." Madeline chimed in then, her interest piqued not by my career, but by what it might imply about my finances. "And you have savings?" "That's good. Very good," she noted, steering the conversation towards my financial stability rather than personal interests. After dinner, Madeline pulled me aside in their living room, a cluttered space that felt more like a bizarre showroom. "Nora, dear, could you suggest something for this room? It feels a bit cluttered," she remarked with a dismissive gesture. Surveying the chaotic scene, I bit my tongue to hold back my real thoughts and offered a professional smile instead. "Well, you might consider streamlining the style. Perhaps choose a theme or a period you like and build around that. There are great, affordable alternatives to these high-end pieces that can create a cohesive look without stretching your budget." Madeline's nose wrinkled at the suggestion. "I don't want alternatives. I want the real deal. The stuff you sell at your store. Maybe with your discount, you could help us out?" The way she put it, as if I owed them a favor, bothered me. Gabriel looked on, hopeful that I would smooth things over. "I'll see what I can do," I conceded, though I knew I'd be cautious about any assistance I offered. Discussions about the wedding with Gabriel's parents felt like trying to calm a storm. They envisioned a lavish affair, but Madeline dropped a bombshell one evening, her voice dripping with entitlement. "Women always dream of big weddings, so they should foot the bill, right?" Her smirk made it clear she wasn't just musing. She meant it. I nearly choked on my drink. "Well, Madeline, this woman dreams of a simple wedding. We're not breaking the bank, or my sanity, over one day." Caught in the middle, Gabriel gave me a pleading look, the kind that begged for diplomacy. "But not this time." "Nora's right," he eventually said, his tone resigned, knowing the battle he was stepping into. "We'll keep it simple." The wedding day was indeed simple, beautiful and understated. Despite the less-than-pleased expressions on Gabriel's parents' faces during the ceremony, I brushed off Madeline's muttered remark to a relative. "You'd think a girl who sells fancy furniture could put on a better show." The day was about us, not them, and I was overjoyed as we exchanged vows in the small garden behind our favorite cafe, surrounded by close friends and family. Post-wedding, life moved forward with Gabriel suggesting we rent a large apartment. "You can deck it out just how you like," he said, fully aware his finances were nearly depleted. After things began to look up for Gabriel, I took the plunge and signed a lease for a chic apartment that set us back $3,500 a month. My savings absorbed the brunt of furnishing and equipping the place, but the result was a space that looked as though it belonged in a high-end design magazine. Madeline, Gabriel's mom, was visibly astounded during her first visit. "This place is like something out of a movie," she exclaimed, gingerly touching the suede couch as if it might disappear. "I want this, all of this." Gabriel glowed with pride as if he had handcrafted each piece himself. He loved to brag about my knack for style to his friends over drinks, using our apartment as the stage for his elaborate tales of aesthetic acumen. However, the financial reality was a different story. All the bills, from the rent to the furniture receipts, were paid by me. During one of their visits, Madeline pulled me aside. Her tone was sweet yet sharp. "Nora, darling, maybe you could do the same magic with our place since you're so good with money and all." The way she put it, as if I were a magician with cash, was almost laughable. "Madeline, decorating is one thing, but managing money is another. You start with a budget, a realistic one," I advised, though her face dropped as if the word budget was offensive. Despite the personal financial strain, my hard work at the luxury furniture salon finally paid off. After months of hustling, I earned a promotion and was moved to the wholesale department, handling bigger clients and bulk deals. The team there was close-knit, and my new boss, Claire, was particularly supportive. Claire was sharp, young, and had a keen eye for design. We hit it off immediately, often sharing stories about our experiences with clients over coffee. One evening, back in our lavishly appointed apartment, which I had paid for out of my own pocket, I talked to Gabriel about Claire. "She's got this killer instinct for deals, you know? Closed two just this week that everyone thought were dead in the water," I mentioned casually during dinner. Gabriel, intrigued while munching on his spaghetti, suggested, "Sounds like a powerhouse. We should have her over for dinner and show off some of your handiwork. It might be good for your career, huh?" So, we invited Claire over the next weekend. I spent the day tidying up, while Gabriel fancied himself a culinary maestro, taking charge of the dinner menu with roast chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, and green beans. Fancy, but understated. Claire arrived promptly, her eyes widening as she stepped into the living room. "Wow, Nora, this place is incredible. You did all this." Before I could answer, Gabriel jumped in, leading her on a tour. "Wait till you see the dining setup," he boasted. Dinner was lively, thanks mostly to Gabriel. He was the quintessential host, cracking jokes, refilling glasses, and laughing a bit too loudly. At some point, he seemed more like the host than I was in my own home. I noticed him being particularly attentive to Claire, laughing a touch too heartily at her jokes, which were amusing, but not hilarious. It irked me enough that I pulled him aside while Claire was in the restroom. "Hey, what's with the show?" I asked him quietly, a hint of irritation in my voice. I whispered to Gabriel, nodding toward the dining room where the remnants of our dinner party with Claire lingered. Gabriel's response was in a low, serious tone. "I was trying to impress her for you. Maybe she'll speed up another promotion or something." I frowned, not pleased with his rationale. "I don't need you to charm my boss for a promotion, Gabriel. I can handle my career on my own," I said firmly. When Claire returned, we wrapped up the evening with dessert, chocolate cake, which was her favorite, as I had mentioned to Gabriel in passing. He had remembered, but only because it played into his plans. After Claire praised the meal and left, Gabriel collapsed onto the couch with a grin, as if he'd achieved a great victory. "See, told you it would go great," he boasted. I sat next to him, not quite sharing his enthusiasm. "It was nice, but don't do that again." "I don't need a show, just be yourself next time," I told him, feeling a mix of annoyance and disappointment. Gabriel simply waved off my concerns and turned on the TV, dismissing me. "You worry too much." It was fine. But it wasn't fine. Not really. His performance felt forced, as if he were playing a part. Since my promotion and the increase in my paycheck, Gabriel has found new ways to spend the extra money. His first target was his wardrobe. "Babe, I can't keep wearing these old suits if you want me to be promoted too. I've got to look the part," he argued one evening, thumbing through a catalog of designer suits that were extravagantly priced. "Fine, we'll update your closet, but keep it sensible, okay?" I conceded, hoping it might boost his confidence and help him advance in his career. The new Gabriel was indeed dapper, and he was all too eager to flaunt his revamped style. Not long after the wardrobe update, he suggested another dinner out with Claire. Could be fun, right? It sounded harmless enough, so I agreed. The night was enjoyable, filled with laughter and expensive wine. When the bill arrived, Gabriel made a show of grabbing it. "Let me get that for you," he told Claire with a flourish. She smiled awkwardly. "Oh, you don't have to, but thank you." With his hand on the leather bill folder, Gabriel leaned in close to me. "Babe, can you cover this? Just play along." Puzzled and slightly annoyed, I nodded and discreetly passed my card to the waiter, while Claire was distracted. Gabriel was beaming as if he had just closed a major deal, and I couldn't help but feel like I was being manipulated in my own life. This pattern of behavior didn't stop. Dinners turned into weekend getaways, which Gabriel insisted on initiating, and I unwittingly financed. He'd tell Claire, "Don't worry about the cost, we've got it," while winking at me across the table. It was during one such extravagant trip to a luxurious beach resort that I reached my breaking point. As I signed yet another exorbitant bill, Gabriel patted me on the back. "Isn't this great? Claire's having a wonderful time. Good for your career." That night in our hotel room, I confronted him. "Gabriel, I can't keep this up. These trips, these dinners, it's too much. We're supposed to be a team, but I feel more like your bank than your wife." Gabriel's demeanor changed instantly. His voice became cold and sharp. "I'm doing this for you, for us. If you can't see that, maybe you should just enjoy it alone. I'm busting my ass here trying to help your career." After that, things changed. Gabriel started staying out late at work, or so he claimed. Sudden meetings and unexpected calls became his new normal. I was left feeling sad and disconnected, wondering where we went wrong. Despite my growing anger, I couldn't help but feel the bitter sting of betrayal. No longer was I the one providing for us financially, and it seemed this shift had soured not only our dinner dates and trips, but also our entire relationship. What was once joyful was now a painful reminder of how much I had lost, not just financially, but emotionally as well. The partner I thought I knew had changed dramatically. When Claire, my friend and boss, urgently called me into her office, a wave of anxiety washed over me. My mind spun with possibilities. Had I missed a deadline? Forgotten an important email? My heart pounded as I knocked on her office door and entered. Claire sat there, her usual warm demeanor replaced by a grave seriousness. Her office was cluttered with unopened gifts and bouquets, adding to the tension. "Nora, please sit down," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. "We need to discuss something important." Her voice was so somber. My stomach churned with dread. As I sat, clutching my hands in my lap, Claire looked at me with a mix of concern and discomfort. "It's about Gabriel," she began, and my heart sank. "His behavior has become quite inappropriate." Confused, I followed her gaze to the pile of gifts. "He's been sending these flowers, jewelry, even designer clothes. It's excessive, and frankly, it's making me uncomfortable. He's blurring the lines between professional and personal boundaries." "Nora." Feeling a hot flush of embarrassment, I stammered, "I had no idea." Claire leaned in, her tone softening. "I value our friendship and respect you greatly, Nora. That's why I must be honest. He's been making advances. I've told him repeatedly that I'm not interested, that I see him only as your husband. But he's not listening." I swallowed hard, barely holding back tears. "Thank you for telling me, Claire. I'll handle it," I whispered, my voice quivering. Reeling from the conversation, I returned home to find Gabriel packing a suitcase, his demeanor oddly cheerful. "There you are. I've got news," he said with a grin, seemingly oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. "I've decided it's time for a fresh start. Quit my job today, and I think it's best if my parents move in here. You should find another place." His words were like a physical blow. "What are you talking about, Gabriel? Your parents? Why would I leave?" I asked, incredulous. He shrugged nonchalantly. "Come on, Nora. This place is too good for just us. Plus, you can afford another spot. No big deal, right?" Anger and disbelief coursed through me. "No big deal? You cheat, you lie, you spend my money, and now you want to kick me out?"
"Whoa, cheat? What are you talking about?"
His feigned ignorance only fueled my anger. "Don't play dumb, Gabriel. Claire told me everything, the gifts, the advances. How could you?" My voice cracked, tears threatening to spill. Gabriel's face hardened. "So what? She's richer and more promising than you. I just want a better life. Just pack up and go, Nora." His words cut deep, severing what little affection I had left for him. That night, as I lay in the spare bedroom, the reality of my crumbling marriage suffocated me. By morning, I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I found a new apartment online, a smaller, quieter place that promised a fresh start. I signed the lease electronically and called the movers, all before Gabriel had even woken up. As the movers began to arrive, I directed them around the house, pointing out what to take. I had gathered all the receipts and proofs of purchase for the furniture. My furniture, paid for with my hard-earned money. Determined and ready, I faced Gabriel as he stumbled out of the bedroom, bleary-eyed and confused. "What's going on, Nora? Why are you taking the furniture?" I held up the folder stuffed with receipts. "Because it's mine," I declared, ready to reclaim my life and my independence. As I stood in the apartment, I firmly asserted my claim over the belongings being loaded onto the truck. "These are mine. I purchased them, so naturally, they're leaving with me," I explained. The movers continued their work as Gabriel watched, his initial protest dying in his throat when he saw the receipts in my hand confirming my ownership. Just then, Gabriel's parents arrived. His mother, Madeline, was visibly upset when she saw the movers transferring furniture out. "Stop immediately. That's my furniture," she exclaimed. The movers hesitated, but at my reassuring nod, they carried on. Madeline, panicking, turned to Gabriel in desperation. "How can we live here without furniture? What are we going to do?" I couldn't suppress a chuckle. "Oh, don't worry, Madeline. I'm sure Gabriel's new girlfriend will fill her place beautifully," I remarked, my words dripping with sarcasm. Madeline looked hopefully at her son, then despairingly around the now sparse apartment. "And is your new boss going to replace all this? Will she take care of you now?" she asked him. Shaking my head, I replied, "Actually, I spoke to her yesterday. She wants nothing to do with either of you or Gabriel. She's even returning the ridiculous gifts he bought." Gabriel's face registered shock, embarrassment, and the dawning realization that his plans were falling apart. Madeline, furious, jabbed a finger at her son. "You fool. We could have had a comfortable life here with Nora's support, and you've ruined it." Gabriel, now desperate, turned to me, his voice trembling. "Nora, please, we can sort this out. Let's start over." I handed him an envelope containing the divorce papers. "Starting over? This is where it begins," I said. "My lawyer will be in touch." As I left the apartment, I didn't glance back. I was not just leaving behind a failing marriage and a deceitful husband, but also the old Nora who had endured too much. In my new, smaller apartment, every inch felt refreshingly mine. Embracing my independence, I decorated with bold, vibrant colors, blues and emerald greens that represented a fresh start. Meanwhile, Gabriel and his parents struggled. Without my financial contributions, they couldn't afford their $3,500 rent and had to move to a modest, rundown apartment. Gabriel refused to settle for a regular job, and Madeline was forced to take a retail position. Their grand expectations had crumbled, and their family dynamic was fraying. One afternoon, as I arranged a new art piece in my living room, Madeline called. Her voice was unnaturally sweet. "Darling, it's Madeline. How have you been? We've all missed you so much." I nearly dropped the phone, half laughing, half in disbelief. "Missed me, Madeline? Or my financial support? Let me guess, you want me to return, to watch Gabriel chase after another unrealistic dream?" As I financially supported everything, Madeline's plea for help was the last straw. "No thanks, Madeline. You don't get it. We're family," she insisted, her voice tinged with desperation. I could only laugh at the irony. "Family doesn't exploit each other, Madeline. Maybe it's time you tried standing on your own 2 feet. Without waiting for her reply, I hung up and blocked her number, effectively closing that chapter of my life for good. Now, removed from the turmoil of my past, my career was taking off spectacularly. Claire, my boss, had grown increasingly supportive, particularly impressed by how I'd managed my personal crises. Just last week, she'd hinted at a potential promotion, a move that would give me even greater control over my professional trajectory. It felt like the universe was finally aligning in my favor. One evening, as I sat in my newly decorated living room, I took a moment to appreciate how far I'd come. The space around me was a vibrant showcase of my style and essence, bold, bright colors and modern designs that mirrored my renewed spirit. I was expecting new friends over that night, colleagues who valued me for my talents and companionship, not for the financial benefits I could offer. The doorbell rang, snapping me out of my reverie. I opened the door to find smiling faces, their genuine warmth a stark contrast to the strained expressions I'd grown accustomed to in the past. We gathered around the sleek, modern dining table I had chosen, laughter and lively conversation filling the room. It was a joyful echo of the new chapter in my life, one filled with sincerity and mutual respect, far removed from the days of dependence and deceit. Hello, my name is Camila, and I've been fascinated by chemistry from a young age. As a child, I loved to mix various ingredients in the kitchen, concocting my experiments much to my mother's dismay, but it was something that captured my heart. After completing high school, I pursued a degree in chemical engineering at the university. Following graduation, I secured a position at a pharmaceutical company where I had the opportunity to work on the development of new medications. I found great satisfaction in my career, feeling that I was contributing to the creation of life-saving treatments. 3 years ago, I met Luca at a gathering hosted by a friend we both knew. He was a tall man with sandy blonde hair and a radiant smile that immediately drew me in. We introduced ourselves and spent the entire evening talking, which swiftly led to us dating. Luca was not only charming, but he also always knew just the right thing to say, making me feel truly valued. After 3 years together, we decided to get married in an intimate ceremony attended only by close friends and family. Following our wedding, I moved into the large, old house where Luca lived with his mother, Gianna. Gianna was bedridden, and Luca had been caring for her. Being new to the family dynamics, I suggested gently that perhaps we could consider a care facility that could provide the necessary medical attention Gianna needed. Luca seemed uneasy with the idea, expressing that his mother had always preferred to stay at home. The following day, Luca's sister Zoe visited. Zoe had always been a tense presence. She had recently become a widow and had inherited a substantial sum from her much older husband. Zoe and I had never really connected, and she was quite vocal about her disagreements. As soon as she arrived, she confronted us about the idea of moving their mother to a home. I tried to explain calmly that it was just one option, but Zoe insisted vehemently that her mother would stay in her home until the end. I chose not to pursue the matter further, especially considering Zoe's recent loss and her clear opposition. Living with Zoe was challenging. She had a way of arriving unexpectedly and complicating matters. She never really took to me and didn't hesitate to show it. One evening, while I was preparing a simple chicken dish for dinner, Zoe entered the kitchen and immediately criticized the meal for being too bland, which was her usual way of expressing dissatisfaction. I responded as calmly as possible, trying to maintain peace. Luca entered the kitchen amidst this tension and asked what was happening. Zoe quickly voiced her displeasure, claiming that the food was not to her mother's taste. Luca, caught in the middle, looked at me with a mix of frustration and appeal, hoping I could somehow smooth things over with his sister. Luca, I've been trying really hard, but Zoe's constant criticism is weighing heavily on me. No matter what I do, it never seems to satisfy her, I confessed, feeling overwhelmed by the situation. Over the next few days, the atmosphere at home became increasingly strained. Zoe's unannounced visits became frequent, and with each visit, she found something new to criticize, making me feel like I was constantly tiptoeing around her, unsure of what might provoke her next. One evening, she barged in and immediately started to berate the state of the house. "Camila, this place is a disaster. Don't you ever clean?" she accused, scanning the room with obvious disgust. "I clean every day, Zoe." "Maybe if you pitched in, it wouldn't be so difficult to manage," I retorted, my patience finally snapping. "How dare you speak to me that way?" "I'm just trying to help," she yelled back. "Help? By criticizing everything I do?" "That's not helping, Zoe," I countered, and my frustration reached a peak. Luca intervened. "Camila, please calm down." But I couldn't hold back my frustration. Calm down? She's constantly attacking me, and I'm supposed to just take it? I argued, the tension escalating. Zoe glared at me and stormed out, leaving a thick air of tension behind. Dealing with Zoe became so challenging that I started avoiding being home when she visited.
It was simply easier that way.
Unfortunately, 8 months later, Gianna's health deteriorated significantly and she passed away. This was a difficult period for everyone, particularly for Luca. The funeral was a solemn event, but Zoe's behavior only added to the stress. At the graveside, she confronted me angrily. "Camila, if you had found the right treatment, Mom might still be here." I was shocked. "Zoe, I'm not a doctor. I did everything I could." I defended myself. "Those are just excuses," she snapped, her words cutting deep without regard for who might hear. After the funeral, I told Luca he needed to address Zoe's behavior. "Luca, you've got to talk to her. She can't keep blaming me for everything," I pleaded, trying to keep my voice steady. But Luca's response was disheartening. "Camila, you're just making things worse. Stop provoking her," he accused, which felt like a punch to the gut. His words were both insulting and hurtful, especially after all I had done to care for his mother. In the months following Gianna's passing, I struggled with the accusations Zoe had thrown at me during the funeral. I needed something to distract myself, so I decided to clear out Gianna's old room, hoping it might help me find some peace of mind. While sorting through her belongings, I discovered a stack of medical documents in her desk drawer. Curiously, I began to sift through them. One report from 4 years prior indicated that Gianna was in excellent health, which puzzled me given her recent death from internal bleeding. When Luca got home from work and saw what I was doing, he asked, "Hey, what are you up to?" I showed him the documents. "Look at this. For years ago, she was fine, but then she died of internal bleedings." Luca looked concerned as he took the papers from me. "Yeah, that is strange. What are you thinking?" he asked. "I'm not sure yet, but it doesn't add up," I said, feeling uneasy. A thought then struck me. Didn't Zoe's husband also die of internal bleeding? Luca nodded slowly. Yes, he did. And both of them had unexplained bruises. This revelation made us both pause, a chilling realization beginning to dawn on us. Feeling increasingly anxious, I discussed my worries with Luca. They both had unexplained bruises, which could be from blood thinners, but neither of them was taking any medication like that, right? I asked, trying to piece things together. "No, they weren't," Luca replied, his brow furrowed with concern. "What are you suggesting, Camila?" "I'm not sure, but it's strange. Maybe I'm reading too much into this," I admitted, trying to soothe my racing thoughts. However, just a few days later, I noticed unexplained bruises on my arms and legs. Confused and concerned, as I hadn't bumped into anything recently, I decided to take a blood test in my lab. The results were shocking. My blood contained high levels of warfarin, a potent anticoagulant. I knew for certain I hadn't taken anything like that. "Luca, we need to talk," I said, finding him in the living room. He looked up, visibly weary. "What's it now, Camila?" "Someone's been poisoning me," I told him, showing him the lab results. His face turned pale.
Who would do that?
"It doesn't make any sense," he said, shaking his head. "I think it's connected to what happened to your mom and Zoe's husband," I explained, the gravity of the situation sending shivers down my spine. "Camila, you're starting to sound paranoid," Luca replied, frowning. "I'm not paranoid. This is real. We need to figure out who's behind this," I insisted, my voice tinged with desperation. Just then, Zoe walked in, unannounced as usual. "What's going on here?" she inquired, looking between us. "Camila thinks someone's been poisoning her," Luca explained, holding up the lab results. "Poisoning? That's ridiculous. She works in a lab. Maybe she accidentally contaminated herself," Zoe said sarcastically. "I didn't take anything by accident, Zoe. This is serious," I countered, frustration building. "Oh, please, you're always so dramatic. Maybe you should focus on your issues instead of creating problems for everyone else," Zoe retorted, rolling her eyes dismissively. "This isn't about drama, Zoe. This is about my life," I snapped back, my anger nearing its peak. "Camila, calm down," Luca interjected, trying to mediate. "Calm down? Your sister's accusing me of making this up, and you're telling me to calm down? I yelled, overwhelmed by frustration and disbelief. Camila, you're acting irrationally. We can't keep doing this. I think we need a divorce, Luca declared coldly. His decision seemed final. Divorce? Are you serious? You're choosing to believe her over me? I asked, stunned and hurt. Yes, Camila. You're always causing trouble. I can't handle it anymore, he said, turning away. Zoe stood by, a smirk of satisfaction on her face. I felt utterly numb as I packed my belongings, the reality of the situation crashing down around me. Zoe's triumphant smile followed me as I left the house, my heart heavy with a sense of profound betrayal. After moving out, I rented a small apartment near my workplace. Despite the emotional turmoil, I was determined to uncover the truth. I reviewed all the evidence, and it became clear that Zoe was responsible. She had poisoned her husband and her mother and had attempted the same with me. I hired a private detective named Matthew to help investigate further. Matthew, I need you to find out everything about Zoe. I'm convinced she's behind this, I instructed him, handing over the documents and my blood test results. Got it, Camila. I'll start right away. Give me 3 weeks, Matthew assured me, nodding decisively. 3 weeks later, Matthew called me. Camila, we need to meet. I've got some information, he said with a serious tone. We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe, where he greeted me with a grave expression, signaling the weight of the findings he was about to share. As I sat across from the private detective, Matthew, my stomach churned with anxiety. He laid a thick folder on the table. All right, what did you find? Asked, my voice tense. Matthew opened the folder, revealing documents that painted a grim picture. Zoe's in deep financial trouble. She's blown through all the inheritance from her husband, and now she's drowning in debt, he explained. I scanned the documents, feeling a wave of anger wash over me. So, she resorted to murder for money? First her husband, then her mother, and she even tried to take me out, I said, piecing together the disturbing pattern.
It seems that way.
She's desperate and dangerous, Matthew replied, his tone grave. Determined to confront the situation, I called Luca to arrange a meeting. Luca, it's Camila. Can we talk? I asked firmly when he answered. What's this about, Camila? He sounded wary. It's important. It's about Zoe, I replied, keeping my voice steady. All right, come over, he agreed, a surprising warmth in his voice. I drove to Luca's house, my heart pounding with anticipation and dread. Upon arrival, Luca greeted me with an unexpected warm smile. Camila, glad you came. You know, today's our anniversary, he remarked, holding a bottle of wine. Luca, we need to talk. It's serious, I insisted, trying to remain composed. Let's hold off on that for a bit. Come on, let's have a drink. It's our anniversary, he persuaded, pouring 2 glasses of wine. Reluctantly, I agreed. All right, just for a bit. Then we need to talk. We clinked glasses and I took a sip, trying to set aside my anxiety. But within minutes, I began to feel dizzy and nauseous. Luca, I feel really sick. Where did you get this wine? I asked, clutching the table for support. Zoe brought it from Italy. She said it's special. I've been drinking it for a while, he replied, his concern growing. Luca, this wine is poisoned. Zoe's trying to kill you for the inheritance. Call 911 now, I managed to say before collapsing to the floor, my vision blurring. As I lay there, barely conscious, I heard the door open and Zoe's voice. What's going on here? She demanded. Camila says the wine's poisoned. She's sick, Luca explained, his voice panicked. Poisoned? She's drunk and making up lies to turn you against me, Zoe retorted, her voice dripping with venom. I'll get a cold compress, Luca said, rushing to the kitchen. Zoe knelt beside me, a cruel smile twisting her face. It's over for you, Camila. In a few hours, you'll die of hemorrhage. Then it'll be Luca's turn, and everything will be mine, she hissed. I tried to respond, but my body wouldn't cooperate. The room spun, and darkness crept in. The last thing I heard was Luca returning, his voice filled with worry and confusion. I awoke days later in a hospital, my body aching and my mind foggy. The room was quiet except for the soft beeping of machines. As I blinked, trying to clear my vision, a nurse bustled around. "Hey, you're awake." She greeted me with a bright smile. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been run over," I muttered, my throat dry and scratchy. "You've been out for a few days. Your husband called the rescue service just in time, even though his sister tried her best to stop him," the nurse informed me, shaking her head. "Luca called, even with Zoe trying to stop him?" I asked, a mix of relief and surprise washing over me. "Yeah, he did. Good thing, too. The doctor said another hour, and it might have been too late," she replied. Just then, the door opened, bringing with it a new wave of concern and questions about what would happen next. As I lay in the hospital bed, a gentle knock at the door preceded the entry of Matthew, the private detective, accompanied by a police officer he introduced as Officer Martinez. "Camila, glad to see you're awake," Matthew said, pulling up a chair next to my bed, his face showing relief but also concern. "Matthew, Officer Martinez, what's going on? What happened with Zoe?" I asked, my voice weak but eager for answers. "You did it, Camila. You helped us neutralize a dangerous criminal," Matthew responded, his tone serious yet compassionate. Officer Martinez chimed in, "We've opened a criminal case against Zoe. We exhumed the bodies of her ex-husband and her mother, and the examinations confirmed they were both poisoned with warfarin, the same substance found in your blood." I felt a rush of emotions, tears welling up in my eyes. "Just like me," I whispered, the reality of the situation sinking in. "Yes, the same substance. It caused internal bleeding, leading to their deaths," Martinez explained, his voice steady, but filled with a somber note. The weight of his words hit me hard, and I couldn't hold back my tears any longer. I lay there, crying with a mix of relief and sorrow, as they told me the nightmare was finally over. "Camila, you were incredibly brave to come forward with all this information. You've saved lives by exposing Zoe," Matthew said, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. While the nurse continued her checks, Matthew and Officer Martinez discussed the next steps in handling Zoe's case. I listened, feeling a profound sense of closure, yet also a deep sadness. "Camila, if you need anything, don't hesitate to call," Martinez said as they prepared to leave. "Thank you, officer. I appreciate everything you've done," I replied, grateful for their support. After they left, I lay back, staring at the ceiling, overwhelmed with relief, but also battling a hollow feeling about Luca. The uncertainty surrounding him and his inability to see his sister's guilt left me feeling disconnected. I knew healing, both physically and emotionally, would take time, but with Zoe facing justice, I had a chance to rebuild my life, one step at a time. The day of the trial was nerve-wracking. I sat in the courtroom, my heart racing, preparing to face Zoe and publicly share the ordeal she had put me through. Luca was there too, his expression one of doubt and confusion. Despite the overwhelming evidence, he seemed unable to accept his sister's guilt. As we waited for the trial to begin, Luca turned to me, his voice low and tense. "Camila, I can't believe Zoe would do something like this. It feels like you're just out for revenge," he muttered. His words cut deep. I was stunned by his continued denial and blind loyalty to Zoe, even in the face of clear evidence. When the trial started, the prosecutor detailed Zoe's actions and the evidence we had gathered. I was called to the stand, my hands shaking as I took my seat. "Camila, can you tell us about your suspicions and the evidence you found?" the prosecutor asked calmly and steadily. I took a deep breath and began. I started noticing strange symptoms after moving in with Luca. His mother's health declined rapidly, and she had unexplained bruises. I found similar symptoms in myself later on, I explained, my voice trembling. "What did you find in your investigation?" he prompted. I hired a private detective who discovered that Zoe was in severe financial trouble. We found evidence that she had poisoned her husband and was likely trying to do the same to me and Luca for financial gain, I continued, trying to maintain my composure. "Did Zoe ever say anything to you that indicated her guilt?" the prosecutor asked. "Yes, just before I lost consciousness. She told me it was over for me, hinting at her plans not just for me but for Luca as well. I recounted, the memory vivid and chilling. The courtroom was silent, hanging on every word, as the weight of Zoe's betrayal and the scope of her crimes became undeniably clear. As I continued to testify, my voice broke with emotion as I relayed Zoe's chilling words, explaining that after my death, Luca would be next. She wanted everything we had, I said, tears streaming down my face. The defense lawyer rose to cross-examine me, intent on sowing doubt. Camila, isn't it true that you and Zoe never got along? Could this be a personal vendetta? No, this isn't personal. This is about stopping a killer, I countered firmly, unshaken by the attempt to discredit my testimony. The trial progressed with more witnesses coming forward and the accumulation of evidence against Zoe. The private detective presented his findings, and the medical examiner testified about the presence of warfarin in the exhumed bodies. The courtroom was charged with tension as Zoe was finally called to the stand. Initially, she denied everything, but overwhelmed by the mounting evidence, she broke down and confessed during a subsequent hearing. Yes, I did it. I poisoned my husband, our mother, and I tried to poison you and Camila, Zoe admitted, glancing at Luca with a scornful smirk. I wanted it all, the money, the property. And look at you now, crying like a baby. Luca's face crumpled, tears streaming down as he absorbed the reality of his sister's betrayal. Zoe laughed coldly, a chilling sound that echoed through the courtroom. You were always so gullible, Luca. You never saw what was right in front of you. The judge's gavel banged, demanding order. Zoe was convicted of double premeditated murder and the attempted murder of both Luca and me. She was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, her mocking smile disappearing as she was led away in handcuffs. After the trial, I made the difficult decision to divorce Luca. The pain and betrayal were too deep to mend. I underwent treatment to recover from the poisoning, and through friends, I learned that Luca was also seeking treatment, as Zoe had attempted to poison him as well. In my new, cozy apartment, a fresh start away from all the chaos, I focused on healing and finding peace. One afternoon, I was having coffee with my friend Luna, who had been a steadfast support through everything. So, how are you doing, Camila? Luna asked, her eyes full of concern. I'm getting there one day at a time. It's been rough, but I'm trying to move on, I replied, taking a sip of my coffee. Have you heard from Luca? She inquired, raising an eyebrow. Yeah, he's tried a few times to patch things up, I said, rolling my eyes. Good for you. After everything he put you through, you deserve better, Luna remarked, nodding in approval. I sighed. I just can't forget how he trusted Zoe over me, time and time again. Trust is everything in a marriage, and once it's gone, there's no going back. You're right. You need someone who believes in you and stands by you no matter what, Luna affirmed, squeezing my hand in support. Later, as I sorted through old photos, each picture revived a mix of sweet and painful memories. My phone buzzed with a message from Luca. I hesitated but opened it. Camila, I know I've hurt you deeply. Can we please talk one last time? The message read. I took a deep breath and replied, Luca, there's nothing left to say. We both need to move on. I wish you well. As I sent the message, I felt a sense of closure, ready to leave the past behind and look forward to a new chapter in my life. As I pressed send, a wave of mixed feelings washed over me, relief intertwined with a sense of finality. It was time to permanently close this chapter of my life and move forward. In the evenings, I found solace in painting, which became a therapeutic outlet for me. The brushstrokes on the canvas allowed me to express and navigate my emotions constructively. I also joined a local book club, which opened the door to meeting new people and gradually forming a new circle of friends. Each gathering and discussion was a step toward rebuilding my social life and healing from past traumas. With every day that passed, I felt myself moving closer to a life defined by trust, joy, and peace. While the past would always be a part of who I am, it no longer controlled my future. Embracing my experiences, I was ready to face whatever came next, armed with newfound strength and wisdom, eager to see what new joys life would bring. My name is Donna, and this is how my journey begins. I was raised in a small town, bouncing from one foster home to another until I settled in with Walter. They offered me something invaluable, a stable environment, which was something I had longed for throughout my childhood. Life was pretty uneventful until I went to college, the first one from my foster family to venture into the big city for higher education. I majored in Chinese, worked tirelessly, and eventually secured a job as a translator at an international trading firm. For a girl from a small town, this felt like a significant achievement. One unremarkable Tuesday, I found myself in a quaint cafe near my office, ordering my usual black coffee when I noticed him. David was his name, tall, with a disarmingly charming smile. He looked up from his phone, all business yet relaxed, and our eyes met. "Haven't seen you around here before," I ventured, trying to sound nonchalant as I joined him with my coffee. His smile broadened. "Just trying to get away from office chaos," he replied, introducing himself. We clicked instantly, and what started as casual coffee dates quickly turned into something more. Weeks flowed into months, and soon a year had passed, and we were discussing life beyond just casual meetups. David, a city native, knew his way around, and had an effortless charm. But life has its rough patches. After a year together, we decided to get married. I was ecstatic, but wanted him to meet the people who shaped me, my foster parents, Walter. They were down-to-earth folks, living a simple, hard-working life. They were fixing up their old house, so they were renting a modest apartment. It wasn't much, but it was packed with love and warmth. I remember warning David, "It's humble, but it's full of great memories." He nodded, though I could tell he felt out of place. That weekend with my parents was special to me. They treated David like family. However, David seemed restless, frequently checking his watch, eager to return to the city. The drive back was silent, tension filling the air until I couldn't take it anymore. "You've been quite silent, David. What's on your mind?" He finally opened up, admitting, "Donna, your folks are great, but our backgrounds are just so different." His words hurt, but I remained calm. "And what exactly does that mean?" I asked. "It's just a different lifestyle, Donna. It's not what I'm used to, but it doesn't change my feelings for you," he hastened to add. I stared out the car window, biting my lip, pondering the differences between my simple roots and his polished world. "David, fancy isn't necessary, but respect for each other's background is," I replied. He agreed, affirming his love, yet I couldn't shake the feeling of disconnection. As I lay awake that night, I reflected on the simplicity I cherished versus the complex world I was about to join. Shortly after we visited my parents, it was time for me to meet David's family. His mother, Rachel, lived in a luxurious high-rise in the city, her apartment a testament to wealth, adorned with lavish decor. As I stepped into this new world, I wondered if David and I could truly bridge the gap between our worlds. When we arrived at her place, Rachel greeted us at the door, impeccably dressed in designer clothes from head to toe. Stepping into her apartment felt like entering the glossy pages of a luxury magazine.
"Donna, is it?"
"And what is it you do?" she inquired, eyeing me as though I were a product she might consider buying. "I'm a translator. I work with Chinese clients at a trading company," I responded, my voice steady despite the scrutiny. "Oh, impressive," she commented with a half-smile, though her eyes continued to scan me, seemingly searching for a flaw. Eventually, my background and my foster parents came up in conversation. Her expression soured slightly. "From the province and fostered, you say? I don't think that's quite fitting for my son," she remarked. David quickly intervened. "Mom, please. Donna's wonderful, and I love her. We're getting married." That set off another round of questions. "Married? And when is this happening? How are you planning it?" Rachel's tone was piercing, overly inquisitive. "We're thinking something small, intimate, just us in Florida," I said, hoping she would appreciate the romantic simplicity. But Rachel's reaction was of outright shock. Florida? Just the two of you? No, that won't do. What will my friends think if I can't even throw my only son a proper wedding? I maintain my composure. It's our day, Rachel. We just want something true to us, without all the fuss. She was clearly upset. This discussion is over, she declared and abruptly left the room. David gave me an apologetic look and whispered, "Let me talk to her. We'll sort this out." 5 months flew by, and there we were in Florida. It was meant to be just David and me, but Rachel appeared uninvited, camera in hand, ready to capture every moment. It felt as if she was constantly there, ensuring she had content to share online. David seemed unaffected, enjoying the sun and the ceremony. I tried to keep smiling, whispering to him as we stood on the beach. "I thought it would be just us." He squeezed my hand. "I know, I'm sorry. She's just excited, I guess. Let's just try to enjoy our day." Rachel was all over the place, her phone perpetually out. "Smile here. Oh, this will look fabulous on my feed." I felt more like a prop in her social media spectacle than a bride on her wedding day. It was supposed to be our special moment, but it had morphed into one of Rachel's lavish displays. Returning home as newlyweds should have been about enjoying those tender, love-filled days. You know, breakfast in bed, slow dances in our living room. And at first it was. David slipped a stunning ring on my finger the day we returned, a family heirloom that sparkled irresistibly. "Be careful with that ring. It's more than just expensive. It's an heirloom," Rachel interjected, looming over us like a dark cloud on a sunny day. Her words felt more like a warning, dampening the joy slightly. The first few weeks, David and I reveled in our newlywed bliss, stealing kisses and cooking dinners together. But then Rachel began showing up without notice, disrupting our routine. One afternoon, as I was folding laundry, the doorbell rang. There she stood, Rachel, with a look as if she were about to inspect a military base. "Just checking in on my favorite newlyweds," she announced. As Rachel's gaze swept through our home, it felt like she was hunting for flaws. I attempted politeness, engaging in light conversation even as she drifted towards the kitchen, her fingers trailing across every countertop. "Donna, darling, do you ever clean this place? And where are the fresh vegetables?" "A man needs his greens," she commented, her voice dripping with criticism. When I relayed the encounter to David later, he shrugged it off. "She means well, babe. Just try to go with it," he advised. "Go with it," I repeated, my frustration rising. "She's treating me like I'm on trial in my own home." David kissed my forehead as if that simple gesture could smooth everything over. "She's lonely, Donna. Let's cut her some slack, okay?" But the slack soon became a never-ending concession. One evening, after a particularly exhilarating day at work having signed a major contract with a new Chinese client, I arrived home to find Rachel sitting in my living room, an uninvited presence brewing trouble. "I heard you've been spending a lot of time at the office." "Late nights, she inquired, eyebrow raised, her voice heavy with suspicion. "It's a big project, lots of new opportunities," I explained, trying to keep the conversation light. However, her disapproval was palpable. 3 days later, Rachel showed up at my office, loudly counting the male colleagues around me and insinuating that I might be involved with one of them. Then, without any invitation, she barged into my boss's office. Seeing that he was an older man, she exclaimed, "Well, she definitely won't mess with the old man." I was mortified, my cheeks burning with embarrassment. I asked her to leave and apologized to my boss and colleagues for the disruption. Thankfully, my boss, Mr. Roy, took it in stride with a laugh, but the embarrassment lingered. That night, I had reached my breaking point. I confronted David in our bedroom, my voice strained. "Your mom crossed a line today, David. She's accusing me of cheating. It has to stop." He sighed deeply, the fatigue evident in his voice. "Just try to get along, please." For me, but getting along was increasingly feeling like tolerating the intolerable. The strain began to affect our relationship. Lately, Rachel had been whispering in David's ear, and he had started to criticize everything about me, from my choice of clothing to my working hours. things he had never minded before. Donna, why do you have to wear that to work? David frowned one morning as I dressed in a simple blouse and skirt. It's professional, David. What's wrong with it? I responded, adjusting my skirt. It's too much. You're just inviting comments. Working with all those guys, he retorted, his tone sharp. It was clear this wasn't really about my clothes. The tension escalated further on my birthday. My boss, who had always been a fatherly figure to me, gifted me a book with a note that read, "To my practical daughter." It was a harmless, thoughtful gift, but David saw it as proof of his unfounded fears.
You see?
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Why is he giving you gifts? It's not right, Donna, David exclaimed, visibly upset. David's reaction was fueled by Rachel's constant meddling. All this tension made my upcoming business trip to a neighboring city, a trip to help set up a new factory for our company, a welcome escape from the ongoing drama at home. Eager for a respite from the constant tension at home, I was grateful for the business trip. It proceeded smoothly, culminating in a dinner with our Chinese partners. As we left the restaurant, I noticed shadows lingering nearby. The street was dimly lit, and my heart raced with apprehension. As I walked towards my hotel, the shadows seemed to edge closer. Feeling unsafe, I asked two colleagues to accompany me. As we approached the hotel, illuminated by lanterns, the shadows resolved into familiar figures, David and Rachel. "What the hell, David? What are you doing here?" I exclaimed, my shock evident. Rachel stepped forward, her face contorted with anger. "We're making sure you're not up to no good. Can't trust you around all these men, can we?" My colleagues looked on, and I felt a flush of embarrassment heat my face. "This is ridiculous. You're both acting like I'm some kind of criminal," I said, trying to defuse the situation, but Rachel was relentless. "I'll be telling your parents about this. They should know what kind of woman you've turned out to be." I couldn't suppress a bitter laugh. "Go ahead, tell them. They'll laugh you out of town." The ride back to our hotel was painfully silent. David and his mother sat in the front, while I was isolated in the back, tears blurring the city lights into colorful streaks as I gazed out the window. I loved David, but I felt trapped in a nightmare with Rachel playing the relentless villain. True to her word, Rachel visited my parents. My mother's shaky voice on the phone relayed the ordeal. "She was here, Donna," Mom said, her voice strained. "She demanded to see her father right away, so I gave her the address to his workshop."
My heart sank.
Dad was at his workshop, a place where he spent his days crafting and creating in his element. Mom continued, "Your mother-in-law saw your father in his work clothes, stained from the day's labor. When your father went to greet her, he apologized for not shaking her hand because they were dirty. She looked at his hands, made a disgusted face, and scoffed. She said she understands now why you turned out the way you did, and left without another word." "Thanks for telling me, Mom. I need to think about what to do," I responded, hanging up, a mix of anger and hurt swirling inside me. The very next day, Rachel confronted me again in our living room, her eyes cold and judgmental. "Donna, now I see where you get your manners, or should I say, lack thereof. Your father, an ordinary worker, his hands permanently dirted. What kind of upbringing, what kind of manners could you possibly teach any children?" Her words cut deep. Before I could respond, David entered the room. Instead of defending me, he went straight to his mother, embracing her. "Mom, I'm sorry about all this. Donna's family, they're just different from us." That was the final straw. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Different? Is that your way of saying my family isn't good enough for your high standards?" My voice broke, the hurt too profound. David looked at me, his eyes devoid of understanding. "It's just how things are, Donna. We come from different worlds," David said, his voice flat, resigning us to an apparent fate dictated by circumstance. "So that's it, huh?" My voice rose, thick with emotion, as despair and disbelief tangled within me. "If I'm such a disgrace, why don't we just end this? If I'm so below you, let's get a divorce." Rachel's eyes sparkled with almost gleeful anticipation. "Well, that sounds like a splendid idea," She chimed in, her tone almost celebratory. David just nodded passively, adding, "Maybe that's for the best." I spent the night alone in our guest room, tears streaming down my face as the harsh words and cold dismissals echoed in my mind. The man I thought I knew, the life I thought we were building, it all seemed like a facade now. As dawn's early light seeped through the blinds, casting a soft glow in the room, I realized it was time to make some hard but necessary decisions. The first person I called was my boss, Mr. Roy, whose support had always been a cornerstone in my professional life. "Mr. Roy, it's Donna," I began, my voice unsteady. "I'm facing some personal issues and need to take some time off. I can take it unpaid if necessary." "Donna," he replied promptly, his voice laced with genuine concern, "you're one of our most valuable team members. Take a paid vacation, sort things out, and come back when you're ready. We'll manage here." His kindness was a balm to my frayed nerves. "Thank you, Mr. Roy. I can't tell you how much this means to me," I managed, feeling the weight of gratitude. Next, I called my mother, my eternal anchor in any storm. As soon as she answered, I let it all pour out, my words rushing in a torrent of emotion. "Mom, it's all falling apart. I can't do this anymore with David and his mom. It's just too much." Her voice, ever calm and soothing, steadied me. "Donna, we've been prepared for this call. Your father and I are on our way. Just pack what you need." As I hung up, I looked around the room at the few personal items I had brought into this house, none of which felt like they truly belonged to me anymore. I began to pack, each item a stark reminder of the life I had imagined with David. Rachel appeared at the doorway, her presence casting a chill. "Remember, Donna, only take what you bought with your own money. Don't think about taking anything else," she said, her voice cold and accusatory. It wasn't long before I heard the familiar crunch of gravel under the tires of an old vehicle. Looking out the window, I saw my parents' beat-up pickup truck pulling up. David and Rachel followed me outside, their expressions a mix of smugness and curiosity. As my parents' truck stopped, David scoffed loudly. "Sure that old thing will even make it back?" My father, embodying a quiet strength, stepped out and faced David without a word. He handed over the divorce papers, his eyes steady and unwavering. David snatched the papers and signed them with a smirk, his mother chuckling beside him. "Glad to be rid of this mess," he muttered. Arriving at my parents' home, a large and welcoming structure that now felt more like a sanctuary, I spent the next few hours unpacking and trying to settle my nerves. The peace of familiar surroundings slowly calmed me. That evening, as I sat looking out at the garden, my phone rang. It was Rachel. "Donna, you need to return the ring. It's a family heirloom, not a parting gift," she demanded sharply. I paused, taking a deep breath before responding firmly. "Rachel, that ring was given to me as a wedding gift. If you want it, come and get it yourself." As I ended the call, the morning light began to spill over the horizon, heralding new beginnings and a day filled with possibilities. As I peered from the upstairs window, David and his mother, Rachel, stood at the gate, their faces marked by astonishment as they looked up at my family home. Their disbelief lent them a nearly comical air, and I couldn't suppress a smirk. They appeared so out of place against the sprawling, meticulously landscaped yard, looking utterly bewildered. Turning from the window, I went downstairs where my parents awaited, exchanging knowing glances with them before we stepped outside. My parents passed David and Rachel without a word, heading towards the garage with serene composure, ignoring the puzzled stares from my estranged husband and his mother. As the garage door swung open, revealing a lineup of sleek, high-end cars, David's audible gasp filled the air. My father casually selected a gleaming black sedan for us to ride in. Just as we were about to drive away, David finally found his voice. "Donna, what is all this? This house, these cars?" I stepped out of the car, approaching them with a newfound calm. "This is my family home, David. My father owns a glass factory and several commercial properties. This is where I grew up." Rachel's face twisted with confusion and disbelief. "But your father, he was wearing work clothes, his hands were dirty." I couldn't help but smile at her naivete. Yes, Rachel, he was launching a new product line. It's a tradition in his company to get involved hands-on. It doesn't mean he's not successful or wealthy. They stood there, stunned, unable to reconcile the image of the hard-working man they had seen with the opulence around them. Just then, a group of our neighbors approached, their faces bright with smiles. "Good morning, Mr. Walter. We heard about your latest charity event. It's wonderful what you're doing. You've got our support in the mayoral elections, you know," one of them called out cheerfully. My parents nodded and thanked them, while David's face registered a mix of awe and regret, his eyes flitting between his mother and me. Rachel looked as though she had swallowed something bitter. Her earlier arrogance evaporated in the face of undeniable reality. I turned back to the car, giving David and his mother one last look. "Well, I guess you see things a little differently now," I said, not unkindly. Their expressions of shock and realization confirmed that my past, filled with hardships and misunderstandings, was truly behind me. The morning's revelations were still settling when David made a sudden move. He shoved his mother aside so forcefully that she stumbled. "It's all your fault, you know. You pushed her away with your nonsense," he shouted at her, his voice tinged with bitterness. Then, turning to me, his demeanor shifted completely. He rushed over, trying to pull me into an embrace, his hands reaching out as if trying to erase everything with a simple touch. "Donna, please listen to me. We were good together, weren't we? I love you, I really do," he pleaded, his voice a desperate whisper. I recoiled from his touch, the warmth we once shared long extinguished by his betrayal. "Stop, David. Just stop," I said firmly, pushing him away with all the strength I could muster. I quickly got back into the car, my heart pounding. My father, without a word, pressed the remote control, and the garage doors began to close behind us, sealing away the tumultuous chapter of my life with David and Rachel for good. David and his mother stood at the end of the driveway, their voices echoing with desperation and disbelief. "Donna, please forgive us. We didn't mean any of it," David yelled, his voice cracking with emotional strain. Rachel, her usual poise crumbled, scrambled on the ground trying to salvage her lost dignity. "Donna, my dear, I was wrong. Please," she pleaded. As we drove away, the weight of the moment bore down on me, yet a part of me sought closure, a definitive end to this turbulent chapter of my life. As we reached the end of the driveway, I asked my father to stop the car. David, seeing this as his chance, hurried up to us, his face alight with a flicker of hope, while his mother, disheveled and desperate, struggled to keep up. Without a word, I rolled down the window, slipped the wedding ring off my finger, and held it out briefly. David's eyes widened as he grasped the finality of the gesture. "This is where it ends, David," I declared, my voice firm and resolute. With that, I tossed the ring out of the window. It caught a brief glint of morning sunlight before landing softly on the grass beside the road. Rachel, ever the opportunist, rushed to where the ring had fallen, her hands frantically searching through the grass. I rolled up the window, shutting out their pleas and the painful past they represented. "Let's go, Dad," I murmured quietly. 3 weeks later, I found myself back in the city, settling into a new apartment that felt more like home than any place had in a long time. I returned to work, where Mr. Roy welcomed me back with open arms and a gentle understanding that eased my reintegration into the routine. David made several attempts to reach out to me, each plea more desperate than the last. He claimed to have severed ties with his mother and begged for another chance, but some things, once broken, cannot be mended. I told him firmly that it was over for good this time and blocked his number. No more words were necessary. It was time to move forward on my terms. My name is Hannah, and I'd like to share with you a vivid portrait of my family dynamics. Let's start with my mother, Megan, whose name perfectly matches her free-spirited and career-oriented personality. Then there's my father, Leroy, who, unfortunately, is about as helpful in parenting as a screen door would be on a submarine. My sister Gianna is 15 years older than me and has shown little interest in my presence in her life. I was born when my mother was 40 and had mistaken her pregnancy for menopause, which adds a bit of ironic humor to my origin. When she discovered her pregnancy, it was too late for alternatives, setting the stage for a chaotic family discussion. My father, lacking in decisiveness, likely offered little support during this crisis. It was my grandfather, Aries, who stepped in to mediate. Despite living comfortably in Portland, he flew in to help manage the situation, offering financial support and urging my parents to give me a chance despite the unexpected circumstances. My mother, deeply engrossed in her career, reluctantly agreed to this arrangement but clarified that her life's trajectory was not to be disrupted. Thus, Hannah, was brought into the world prematurely, with several health issues, into a family that viewed me more as a burden than a blessing. My earliest years were marked by lengthy hospital stays, with my mother rarely present. Instead, my father and Aunt Remy, a true angel in human form, were my constant guardians. Aunt Remy, who had no children of her own, devoted herself to my care, offering comfort and encouragement when my mother was absent. As I grew older, my grandfather intervened once more to accommodate our family's spatial needs by purchasing a larger home. However, living there felt more like being in a sterile museum than a family home, always instructed to be quiet and cautious, as if I were an unwanted artifact rather than a family member. While both parents were frequently occupied with work, their scarce presence felt more resentful than nurturing. A series of nannies came and went, each leaving little impression or emotional connection. Gianna, my older sister, behaved more like a distant roommate than a sibling, distinctly uninterested in fostering any bond with me. I vividly remember, at the age of 7, attempting to connect with her and being rebuffed as she prepared for college, a clear sign of our disconnected lives. This background sets the stage for my journey of self-discovery and the search for a sense of belonging within and beyond the confines of my family's expectations. I didn't want to play alone and asked my sister, "Can't we do something together?" But Gianna slammed her mascara down and turned sharply towards me. "Look, we're not friends, okay? I'm not here to entertain you. Go bother mom or dad." That interaction pretty much summed up the extent of our sisterly relationship. My mom wasn't much better. Each day, she would come home from work, kick off her heels, and head straight for the liquor cabinet. Eager to see her, I'd call out, "Mom, can we play a game or read a story?" She'd pour herself a large glass of wine, let out a heavy sigh, and say, "For God's sake, Hannah, can't you see I need some peace and quiet? Go to your room and play by yourself. You're old enough to entertain yourself now." And my dad? He had promised to take care of me if Mom agreed to have me, but that promise turned out to be empty. He was always either too busy or too tired to spend time with me. His favorite phrase was, "Not now, Hannah." I once overheard them arguing about it. Mom hissed at him, "Leroy, you promised you'd help with her." "I can't do this all on my own." Dad shot back, "What do you want from me, Megan? I work all day too. I'm exhausted when I get home. She's always so needy." I didn't stick around to hear the rest. I had heard enough to understand where I stood in their eyes. A burden, an obligation, a mistake they were stuck with. After a while, I stopped trying to engage with them. What was the point? I learned to entertain myself, to be quiet, to stay out of their way. I became a ghost in my own home, drifting from room to room, trying not to disturb the so-called real family. The only bright spot in my life was Aunt Remy. She lived nearby, and I started spending more and more time at her place, weekends, holidays, any chance I got. With Aunt Remy, I felt seen, heard, and loved. We'd spend hours doing puzzles, baking cookies, or just talking. She'd ask me about school, my friends, my hopes and dreams, things my parents never bothered with. Life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. When I was 12, still navigating the emotional wasteland I called home, my parents dropped a bombshell. "Hannah," Mom said, her voice unusually chipper, "we have wonderful news. Your sister Gianna is getting married, and she's pregnant." Dad chimed in, grinning. We're going to be grandparents. I forced a smile, wondering why they were telling me this, as if I should be jumping for joy. That's great, I managed to say. We're going to be very busy preparing for the wedding, Mom continued, oblivious to my lack of enthusiasm. So, we want you to stay with your Aunt Remy for a while. I blinked, processing their words. They wanted to ship me off because of a wedding. Part of me wanted to be hurt, but honestly, it was the best news I'd heard in years. Sure, I said, trying not to sound too eager. I'd love to stay with Aunt Remy. They looked relieved, probably expecting me to put up a fight. Shows how little they knew me. I packed my bags faster than you could say, unwanted child, and practically skipped to Aunt Remy's house. As the months flew by and the wedding preparations were in full swing, I realized just how much happier I was away from all the drama. I was too wrapped up in the new, joyful life I was leading to worry about anything else. Aunt Remy and I would spend our days cooking together, watching movies, and taking leisurely walks in the park. She would help me with my homework and listen intently as I shared stories from school, genuinely interested in what I had to say. A week before Gianna's wedding, which coincided with my 16th birthday, I woke up to the delightful aroma of pancakes and Aunt Remy's cheerful, albeit off-key, singing from the kitchen. I shuffled downstairs in my pajamas to her exuberant greeting. Happy birthday, my dears. She enveloped me in a tight hug and handed me a beautifully wrapped box. It's from your grandfather. He sent it over yesterday. I eagerly tore into the package, my eyes lighting up as I uncovered a brand new smartphone, the latest model. Overwhelmed with excitement, I called Grandpa Aries. His warm voice greeted me. Hello, birthday girl. Do you like your present? I gushed. I love it, Grandpa. Thank you so much. We chatted briefly, and then he posed the question I had been dreading. So, how did your parents congratulate you? I hesitated, not wanting to admit the truth. I haven't seen them yet. I was planning to go home soon. I'm sure they'll say something then. There was a pause on the other end, and then Grandpa suggested, why don't you do a live broadcast when you go? I'd love to share in the joy. With a mix of hope and apprehension, I made my way back to my parent house. The walk seemed both too long and too short. As I turned onto our street, I took a deep breath and started the live broadcast. Hey, Grandpa, I said, trying to keep my voice cheerful. I'm on my way to see Mom and Dad now. Thanks again for the awesome phone. I filled the silence with chatter about my morning with Aunt Remy and how excited I was about my birthday. As I approached our house, a sense of unease settled over me. Well, here we are, I announced to the camera, climbing the front steps. I hesitated before pushing open the door. Mom? Dad? I'm home. Silence greeted me. The house felt eerily quiet, almost abandoned. I frowned, panning the camera around the empty living room. Guess they're not down here, I muttered, more to myself than to Grandpa. I'll check upstairs. My footsteps echoed in the quiet house as I climbed the stairs. At the top, I noticed something odd. My room's door was closed, which was unusual because I always left it open when I wasn't home. That's weird, I remarked, reaching for the doorknob. My doors never closed. I pushed it open and froze. The room that greeted me was no longer mine. The walls, once a soft lavender, were now painted a pale blue. My posters had been replaced with cutesy animal prints, and my bed was gone, replaced by a white crib. What the hell? I gasped, stumbling backward. The phone nearly slipped from my hand as I spun around, trying to make sense of the transformation. Just then, I heard a door open behind me. I whirled around to see my parents emerging from their bedroom, looking startled to see me. Hannah, Mom said, her eyes darting between me and the transformed room. As I held the phone in my hand, my mother's voice barely registered in my mind, still stunned by the transformation of my room. What are you doing here? She asked. What happened to my room? I demanded, my voice shaky. Why is it blue? Where's all my stuff? My father cleared his throat, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Well, Hannah, we've decided to give this room to Gianna's baby, our first grandson, he explained, his voice faltering. Mom nodded enthusiastically, a forced smile plastering her face. Yes, isn't it wonderful? Gianna's having a boy, the son your father has always dreamed of having. He'll be living here with us after the wedding. I felt a punch to the gut. But where am I supposed to sleep? Where's my stuff? Oh, we packed up your things, Dad said dismissively, waving his hand as if it were a trivial matter. They're in boxes downstairs. You should take them with you when you leave. We don't want them cluttering up the place. I stared at them, struggling to process their words. Leave? What do you mean leave? This is my home. Mom's smile faltered momentarily before she forced it back into place. Hannah, dear, you have to understand. With Gianna, her husband, and the baby moving in, well, there's just no room for you here anymore. I stood frozen in disbelief, my mind racing with the shock of their words. Then, a surge of anger overtook the shock. No, I said firmly, my voice trembling. No, I won't leave. This is my home too. You can't just throw me out like I'm nothing. Mom's fake smile vanished, replaced by a look of irritation. For heaven's sake, Hannah, don't be difficult. I shot back, voice rising. It's my birthday, and you're kicking me out. You didn't even remember, did you? Dad rolled his eyes. Your birthday? Is that what this tantrum is about? We don't have time for this nonsense. Their callousness struck me like a physical blow. I felt tears welling up, but I blinked them back furiously. How can you be so cruel? I'm your daughter. A daughter we never wanted, Mom snapped, her composure cracking. Do you have any idea how much you've cost us? How much attention you've demanded? We're exhausted, Hannah. Dad nodded, his expression twisted with annoyance. We didn't want a second child. You were a mistake, an accident. And now we finally have a chance at the family we always wanted. Their words cut deep, each one stabbing at my heart. I watched in stunned silence as they grabbed the bags they had packed with my belongings and started shoving them out the front door. There, Mom said, dusting off her hands. Now, take your things and go to your precious Aunt Remy. She loves you so much. Let her deal with you. I was paralyzed, unable to move or breathe, reeling from the shock. What are you waiting for? Dad barked. Get out. We have a wedding to prepare for, and we don't need you here complicating things. That's when the dam of my emotions broke. Tears streamed down my face as the full weight of their rejection overwhelmed me. How could you do this to me? I sobbed. I'm your child. Stop it, Mom hissed, glancing nervously at the windows. You're embarrassing us. The neighbors will hear. Good. I shouted through my tears. Let them hear. Let everyone know what kind of people you really are. Dad grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in painfully. That's enough, he growled, dragging me to the door. Get out now, and don't come back. With one final shove, I found myself on the front porch, my belongings scattered around me. The door slammed shut behind me with a finality that echoed in my bones. I don't know how long I sat there sobbing on the steps. Eventually, I gathered my things and started the long, miserable walk back to Aunt Remy's. The bags felt impossibly heavy, weighed down by more than just their contents. Struggling with more than just my belongings, I was on my way, tears in my eyes and sniffling, when suddenly a familiar voice interrupted my sorrow. Hannah, can you hear me? I spun around in confusion before realizing the voice was from my phone. Shocked, I remembered the live broadcast and that Grandpa had seen everything. Grandpa, I stuttered, my hands shaking as I held up the phone. Oh, sweetheart, he responded, his voice filled with emotion. I'm so sorry you had to experience that. Don't worry, we'll figure it out. For now, head over to Remy's. We'll catch up at the wedding in a few days. Try to enjoy your birthday a bit, okay? His comforting words helped soothe me slightly. By the time I reached Aunt Remy's, my tears had almost stopped. She greeted me at the door with a tight hug, seeing the state I was in with my bags and swollen eyes. Bless her, Aunt Remy insisted on celebrating my birthday properly. She let me invite a few friends, baked a cake, and did everything she could to make the day memorable. When the day of Gianna's wedding arrived, I wasn't officially invited, but Aunt Remy urged us to go. I felt out of place in my best dress as we entered the reception hall. I noticed Grandpa Aries right away, sitting up front, his posture rigid, emitting an aura that made me uneasy. As soon as we arrived, the newlyweds entered. Gianna was radiant in her wedding dress, happiness written all over her face. My parents followed, pride clear on their faces, and a pang of hurt struck me. During dinner, as the speeches started, Grandpa Aries stood up decisively. "I have something to say," he declared, his voice echoing through the hall, capturing everyone's attention. Gianna and her husband looked puzzled. My parents turned pale. Grandpa took over the microphone, apologizing for the interruption. "Ladies and gentlemen," he started, "there's a serious injustice that needs to be addressed." He then recounted, without missing a detail, how unfairly my parents had treated me, from their initial resentment at my birth to the harsh way they threw me out on my birthday. The room shifted from confusion to shock to disbelief as he spoke. My mother tried to intervene, her face flushed with anger. Gianna was in tears, her makeup smeared, and her husband looked visibly uncomfortable. The guests whispered among themselves, their expressions ranging from shock to disapproval directed at my parents. Grandpa Aries faced them, his voice frosty. "I want to be clear. My will is changing. Every penny will go to Remy and Hannah. Leroy, Megan, Gianna. You're cut off." The hall erupted into pandemonium. My mother gasped, my father turned a deep shade of red, and Gianna lamented her spoiled wedding day. But Grandpa wasn't finished. He turned to Aunt Remy and me, still reeling from the scene, and said kindly, "Come on, girls. We're leaving. We don't need to stay where we're not wanted." Numb. I stood up and followed him. As we walked out, I could feel every gaze on us. Some sympathetic, others judgmental. I kept my eyes on Grandpa's strong back, trying hard not to break down. The morning after the tumultuous wedding, I was jolted awake by a persistent knocking at Aunt Remy's door. Still groggy and trying to piece together the shock of yesterday, I made my way downstairs to find my parents on the porch, their expressions a tangled mess of desperation and guilt. "Hannah, sweetie," my mom started, her voice overly sweet, "we need to talk. Please come home. We're so sorry. We love you. We really do." A wave of anger surged through me. "Love me? After you threw me out and called me a mistake?" They launched into a string of apologies, each more feeble than the last. But as I listened, a stark realization dawned on me. "This isn't about me, is it?" "This is about the inheritance," I interrupted my dad sharply. Their crestfallen faces confirmed my suspicions. They weren't here for me. They were here for Grandpa's money. "Get out," I demanded, my voice trembling with rage. "I don't want to see either of you ever again." I slammed the door shut, leaning against it as I fought to steady my pounding heart. But they didn't give up. Over the next few days, they appeared repeatedly, each visit more determined than the last. They called, sent emails, and even enlisted other relatives to sway me. It all escalated about a week after the wedding. I was alone when I heard a ruckus outside. To my dismay, I saw my parents trying to barge past Aunt Remy, who had just gotten back from the store. "She's our daughter," my dad shouted. "You can't keep her from us." Something inside me snapped. Enough was enough. "Aunt Remy's," I called out, stronger than I felt. "I want you to be my legal guardian." There was a pause. Then Aunt Remy's face lit up with a warm smile. "Oh, sweetie, I'd be honored." We reached out to a lawyer the very next day. It wasn't a simple process. There were forms, interviews, and even a court hearing. But I clung to a crucial piece of evidence, a video from my disastrous birthday visit. On the day of the court hearing, I was nauseous with anxiety. My parents were there, putting on their best act of concerned, loving parents. But when the judge requested evidence and we played the video, showing them coldly casting me out, declaring me unwanted, the mood in the courtroom shifted dramatically. The judge's expression hardened as she watched. "In all my years on the bench," she declared, "I've rarely seen such blatant parental neglect and emotional abuse." The ruling was swift. Aunt Remy was granted full legal guardianship, and my parents' rights were terminated. As the gavel struck, a profound sense of relief washed over me. For the first time in my life, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, knowing I was finally free from the burden of their conditional affections. Now liberated from their damaging influence, life began to unfold in surprising ways. Just as I believed the dust had settled, Grandpa Aries summoned us to his lawyer's office. Sitting in luxurious leather chairs, surrounded by mahogany shelves and the scent of aging paper, I felt a wave of nerves. "Hannah, Remy," Grandpa started, his voice grave yet his eyes gleaming with mischief. "I want you both to understand that I've made some changes to my will." He signaled his lawyer, who presented a hefty document. "As I declared at the wedding, I've decided to leave my entire estate to the two of you. Leroy and Megan are officially out of the will." The news hit me like a thunderclap. Although Grandpa had hinted at this during the wedding, the reality of his decision hadn't sunken until now. We left the office, my mind reeling from the enormity of what had just transpired, and my phone buzzed. It was Gianna. "How could you do this to me?" she shrieked into the phone as soon as I answered. I flinched, holding the phone away from my ear. "What are you talking about?" I asked, bewildered. "Don't play dumb," she retorted. "You turned Grandpa against us. Now he's leaving everything to you and Aunt Remy. It's not fair. I deserve my share too." Her words sparked a surge of indignation. After all the disdain they had shown, her audacity was astounding. "Gianna," I tried to remain calm. "I didn't ask for any of this. It was Grandpa's choice, not mine." "But you must have manipulated him," she accused. "You've always been envious of me. This is your revenge, isn't it?" I took a deep breath, counting to 12, striving to keep composed. "Gianna, I'm sorry you feel that way, but I had no part in Grandpa's decision. If you think you can change his mind, you'll need to speak with him directly." "Maybe I will," she huffed. "And don't think this is over, Hannah. You can't just waltz in and take what's rightfully ours." After hanging up, I was left with a cocktail of emotions, anger, sadness, and above all, fatigue. It was then I resolved to focus on my future. I plunged into my studies, eager to excel in my exams and secure a place in a reputable college. Aunt Remy supported me, assisting in my search for schools, majors, and scholarships. Though my family dynamics were far from ideal and I anticipated more conflicts regarding the inheritance, I now had a stable home with Aunt Remy and Grandpa Aries. With a promising future and newfound resilience, I was ready to tackle any challenges that lay ahead. After moving out and buying my place, the strain on my family relationships intensified when they insisted that the house should be handed over to my sister. They even took legal action, which they lost, leaving them saddled with a $25,000 debt. This situation has lingered in my thoughts, making me question whether I need advice or just a space to express my feelings. Throughout my life, I felt a lack of love for my family. My sister Victoria, who is 4 years younger, has always been the favored one, exacerbating our already strained relationship. From my earliest memories, it seemed like my parents placed Victoria at the center of their universe, treating her as the golden child, while I felt like an outsider. This pattern of favoritism was evident in many family events, including last Christmas. Victoria received a brand new PlayStation 4, something I had longed for, while I received only a pair of plain white socks from Walmart. It wasn't just about the socks. It was about feeling overlooked as Victoria joyously opened gift after gift. This wasn't an isolated incident. My family rarely remembers my birthday. The last time they celebrated it, I was 9. In contrast, Victoria's 18th birthday was an extravagant affair with a lavish party, complete with a trampoline, entertainers, and professional catering. I wasn't even invited, and only found out about the party the day before. Despite these challenges, I've always excelled academically, stayed out of trouble, and tried to meet my family's expectations. However, the emotional gap has only grown. Now, as I spend my birthdays with college friends, there's a small, celebratory atmosphere, but it starkly differs from a family celebration. Each year, as Victoria's elaborate birthdays highlight what I miss, I'm reminded of the stark contrast to my own experiences, reinforcing a deep-seated feeling of being undervalued. The pain runs deeper than just receiving fewer presents. It's about feeling perpetually sidelined and unseen, despite my efforts to belong and contribute positively to my family. Though I've come to realize that my sister Victoria was born with a magnetic personality that naturally attracted others, her arrival marked a significant shift in my family dynamics. She was outgoing, athletic, and had a knack for making friends, qualities that stood in stark contrast to my own. My parents were overjoyed when she was born, and I initially thought we would become close siblings, bonding over video games and shared interests as portrayed in movies. However, it soon became clear that Victoria preferred the company of her sporty friends over any relationship with me, leaving me feeling neglected and forgotten. As the years passed, my resentment towards Victoria grew. While I initially believed it wasn't her fault, I couldn't help but notice how she began to wield her influence over our parents, who seemingly excused her every mistake. For instance, when she accidentally broke the TV while her friends were over, she blamed it on me. Despite my absence during the incident, my parents took her side without hesitation, grounding me for a month and confiscating my phone. Feeling criminalized by my own family, I retreated into solitude, spending most of my time either in my room or at friends' houses. My own space felt suffocatingly small compared to Victoria's room, which was adorned with the latest gadgets and sports memorabilia. It seemed she had her own little empire, while I was just a shadow within our home. My 20th birthday came and went without any acknowledgement from my family. That morning, life at home carried on as usual with no one pausing to wish me a happy birthday. This profound sense of invisibility cemented my realization that nothing was going to change. Victoria had monopolized our parents' affection. This realization led me to distance myself from my family. I moved out as soon as I could, sharing a place with university friends. The distance brought a sense of liberation. To support myself, I turned to freelancing in graphic design. It started as a means to get by, but I soon found myself immersed in bigger projects, working tirelessly to carve out my own path of success, independent of my family. At 25, my life took a positive turn when I met Logan. He was everything I admired: intelligent, ambitious, and kind-hearted. Like me, he was a freelancer, managing social media for businesses. We clicked immediately, finding synergy in our work and personal lives. Logan was the first person who made me feel seen and valued for who I am, not just for what I could offer. His understanding and love were genuine, providing a stark contrast to the familial affection I had always craved but never received. Through him, I learned that being part of a family isn't just about blood relations, but about mutual respect and understanding. Logan's affection for me was genuine, rooted not in obligation but in real emotions. As our careers flourished, we began envisioning a shared future. After a year of dating, we decided to move in together, and soon after, we started planning to buy a home. We weren't looking for just any house. We wanted something special. Eventually, we found a sprawling 3-story house in the suburbs. It was a bit pricey, but together with our savings and combined income, we could afford it. The day we signed the contract and became the official homeowners was a joyous milestone. It was the culmination of our hard work and partnership. For days after moving in, my phone started buzzing with calls from my family. Since I had moved out, we had barely spoken, and I had been avoiding their calls due to the awkwardness between us. However, the persistent ringing eventually wore me down, and I answered. To my surprise, they were in town and wanted to visit our new home. Reluctantly, I agreed, thinking it best to face this encounter head-on rather than continue avoiding them. A few hours later, my parents and Victoria showed up at our doorstep, accompanied by a man I'd never seen before. Things quickly took an unexpected turn when I found out the man was Victoria's fiancé, Jameson, and that Victoria was pregnant. I was shocked. No one had informed me of her engagement or pregnancy. As they entered our home, the atmosphere grew tense. My mother attempted small talk with Logan, but the underlying discomfort was palpable. Suddenly, my father, with a dismissive tone, commented on the house, suggesting that he didn't think I could afford such a place. Despite the provocation, I chose not to engage, hoping to keep the peace. However, the situation escalated when my father, with a sense of entitlement, suggested that Victoria and Jameson should move into our house to accommodate their growing family. He argued that the house was too big for just Logan and me and that Victoria and Jameson needed the space more to raise their child. I was dumbfounded by his audacity to dictate what should happen to our home. The room fell silent as I absorbed the weight of his words. The suggestion that we should just step aside for Victoria's new family was too much to bear. Years of built-up resentment came to the surface. I firmly asserted that the house belonged to Logan and me, stressing that it was legally in our names and no one else had the right to make decisions about it. Victoria, smirking, interjected, questioning our need for such a large house. That was the last straw. I confronted them, expressing my long-repressed anger and frustration. I declared that I was done letting them impose their will on my life. This house was our sanctuary, our achievement, and I was not going to let it be claimed by anyone else. The confrontation marked a turning point for me. I realized the importance of setting boundaries with my family to protect my happiness and peace. This was more than just about a house. It was about claiming my independence and refusing to be overshadowed or underestimated any longer. My father's aggressive stance escalated as he stood, puffed out his chest, and berated me haughtily, arguing that I should be grateful and implying it was shameful to live in a house beyond my means. He insisted that if we gave the house to Victoria, she wouldn't have to feel the financial strain and boldly declared that it was inevitable the house would become hers. Shocked and enraged by his entitlement, I lost control. In a flash of anger, I lunged at him, pinning him against the wall, and demanded he leave our home immediately. Logan tried to intervene and calm the situation, but the years of pent-up frustration and anger boiled over. My father pushed back, and soon we were physically fighting, our shouts filling the air as my mother and Victoria screamed in the background. Jameson, caught off guard, made a frantic phone call, likely to the police. The situation spiraled further when the police arrived, breaking up the fight and handcuffing both my father and me. They escorted us to a police car. I was stunned. Never in my wildest dreams had I expected a family visit to culminate in a physical altercation and a ride in a police car. Hours later, Logan posted my bail, but the emotional and relational damage was severe. The chaos didn't end with the police visit. My father, driven by cunning and desperation, decided to legally challenge me for the ownership of the house. He argued that Victoria and Jameson needed it more, taking the dispute to court. I was shocked by his audacity, but prepared to defend my rights vigorously. I hired a lawyer and gathered all necessary documents proving the house was legally mine. I also decided it was time to bring to light the mental and psychological abuse I had endured for years. I collected evidence including emails, text messages, and testimonies from friends who had witnessed my parents' behavior towards me. In court, my lawyer presented not only the legal evidence, but also the pattern of neglect and abuse I had faced. The trial was grueling, with my father portraying himself as a caring parent, while Victoria and Jameson played the victims, pleading their need for the house for their upcoming child. However, their attempts to label me as selfish failed. After several months, the verdict was announced in my favor, and the court additionally ordered my father to pay $210,000 in damages for the mental and psychological harm caused. For the first time in my life, I felt that justice was truly on my side. Following the judgment, I made the difficult decision to cut off all contact with my parents and Victoria. The years of manipulation and favoritism were too much to bear any longer. Logan and I were free to start anew, truly making the house our own, and beginning to build a life together free from family strife. Though the scars from the past hadn't fully healed, we were on a path to recovery. Now, as I reflect on those turbulent times, it's hard to believe how much my parents had tried to deceive and manipulate me. It's been 2 years since that ordeal, and before I delve further into our ongoing journey, Let me share about our wedding, which took place just before the court case concluded. It was the happiest day of my life and solidified my decision to marry Logan, who had stood by me through the family saga, proving to be my true partner and greatest supporter. I could finally trust fully. We opted for a small, intimate wedding ceremony. It was just Logan, his close friends, and relatives. No one from my family was invited. Given the history of manipulation, abuse, and litigation they had subjected me to, I couldn't risk their toxic behavior overshadowing the joy of our wedding day. The stark realization of their true nature had become undeniable, and I wanted our celebration to be untouched by any negativity. A few days after our blissful union, however, I received a lengthy, guilt-laden email from my mother expressing her deep hurt over not being invited to the wedding. How she discovered the details of the event remains a mystery. My father, on the other hand, made no attempt to reach out, which was a relief. But Victoria's reaction was predictably volatile. She had always been the golden child, forever striving to win our parents' approval, never taking responsibility for her own actions, always pointing the finger at someone else. The court's decision in my favor, which resulted in a financial judgment of $210,000 against my parents, did not bankrupt them, but it did tighten their financial leeway. Spoiled throughout her life, Victoria struggled to accept this new reality. She felt entitled to the house my father owned and demanded large sums of money, but these expectations were quickly becoming her downfall. After the trial, her fiancé Jameson left her, and she reportedly suffered a miscarriage due to the stress, an event she, too, blamed on me. This blame seemed to extend to all her misfortunes. The loss of the lawsuit by my father, their financial woes, and Jameson's departure, all were somehow seen as my fault. The situation escalated unexpectedly about a month into our marriage. Logan and I, relishing our newfound peace away from family drama, decided to take a leisurely walk in our neighborhood. It was a calm, refreshing day until we saw Victoria. She was standing at the corner of a street, her gaze intense and full of anger. Confused and startled, I confronted her, asking what she was doing there. Before I could make sense of the situation, she charged at me, wielding a heavy iron rod, likely picked up from a nearby construction site. My heart raced as she swung it at my abdomen with such force that pain shot through me instantly, fiery and sharp. As I doubled over in agony, Victoria didn't stop. She swung the rod again, this time striking my shin, causing a sickening crack as I collapsed onto the sidewalk. Amidst her relentless accusations, blaming me for our father's financial ruin and for everything that went wrong in her life, including Jameson leaving her, I struggled to stand and defend myself, but my body wouldn't cooperate. Lying there, injured and in shock, I realized just how deeply the seeds of resentment were sown in Victoria's heart. This violent encounter was the culmination of years of familial discord, a stark reminder of the long and painful history that had led us here. As I lay injured on the sidewalk, the cacophony of voices grew louder, and I could hear the hurried footsteps of people rushing toward me. Someone restrained Victoria and pulled her away, but my consciousness was slipping, blurred by pain and shock. When I finally regained awareness, I found myself in a hospital bed with Logan sitting beside me, his face etched with worry and his eyes brimming with tears. Attempting to speak, I realized how dry my throat was and felt a sharp sting with every breath due to my injuries. Logan, holding my hand tightly, asked quietly, "Are you okay?" Though I murmured a weak, "I'm okay," the truth was far from it. The doctor informed me that I had sustained multiple broken ribs, a fractured left leg, and a broken right arm. It was a miracle I had survived. Without the timely intervention of the bystanders, Victoria's attack could have been fatal. She was arrested at the scene and taken into custody while I was rushed to the hospital. During my recovery, Logan was an unwavering presence by my side. He handled everything, police reports, insurance paperwork, and even contacting a lawyer, as we prepared for the impending trial. Victoria was facing serious charges of assault with a deadly weapon, and given the severity of my injuries, she was potentially looking at a substantial prison sentence. Logan explained to me that after being abandoned by Jameson, Victoria had spiraled into severe depression. According to the police report, she refused to accept any personal responsibility, instead placing all the blame on me. During her police interrogation, she expressed no regret for her actions, insisting that I had ruined her life and deserved what happened. She held a firm belief that she was seeking justice for the wrongs she felt were caused by me, including her fiancé leaving her and her father's financial issues. My hospital stay was prolonged and painful. The days were filled with relentless medical examinations, physical therapy, and the heavy burden of the upcoming trial. I couldn't walk for weeks, and even upon discharge, I relied heavily on crutches and needed significant support for my arm. Doctors warned that my recovery might take months and that there was a possibility I might never regain full functionality. When the trial against Victoria commenced, she pleaded not guilty, maintaining that her actions were justified due to the extreme mental distress she claimed to have been experiencing. Her defense argued that the breakdown of family relationships had severely destabilized her. However, the evidence against her was overwhelming. Eyewitness accounts from the day of the attack confirmed she had assaulted me with clear intent, and the prosecution presented detailed medical reports of my injuries along with police statements about her premeditated actions. Sitting in the courtroom, watching my sister attempt to justify her assault was an excruciating experience. Throughout the trial, she avoided any eye contact with me, acting as if I no longer existed. This dismissal was perhaps more painful than the physical injuries she had inflicted, a stark reminder of the deep familial fractures that had led to such a devastating confrontation. Perhaps the most harrowing part of the trial was watching my parents sit in the courtroom next to Victoria, nodding in agreement every time she claimed that I had destroyed her life. Each nod was like a knife twisting in my heart, a stark betrayal as they continued to side with her, unwavering in their belief that she was the victim. This reinforced the painful reality that their support for her had never faltered. The trial stretched on for several weeks, but the verdict seemed almost preordained due to the overwhelming evidence against Victoria. Ultimately, she was convicted on serious assault charges and sentenced to 4 years in prison, with the possibility of parole in 3. By the time the verdict was delivered, the outcome didn't change the stark truth I had come to accept. I was effectively without a family. This entire ordeal crystallized the painful realization that those who were supposed to be closest to me were not truly my family. Through it all, Logan's presence has been my cornerstone. He has stood by me unwaveringly, facing each challenge head-on and providing steadfast support. Together, we are focused on moving forward and rebuilding our lives positively. Physically and mentally, the road to recovery is gradual. I am healing slowly, attending therapy regularly to work through the trauma of past events. It's a lengthy process with ups and downs. There are days when I feel a significant improvement and can appreciate the progress I've made, but there are also days when the journey seems daunting and the person staring back at me from the mirror seems like a stranger. Looking ahead, I can't predict everything the future holds, but I've resolved to cherish each day and take it as it comes. Now, more than ever, I understand the importance of trust and know clearly who I can count on. With this newfound clarity and Logan's unwavering support, I am slowly piecing together a brighter, more hopeful future. When I was younger, I didn't fully understand why things were the way they were. But one moment stands out in my mind, a moment that changed everything. My mother once told me, "If I had known about your developmental disorder, I wouldn't have had you. You're an unnecessary presence in our family." Hearing those words shattered my world. My heart felt like it had stopped, and the world around me turned completely dark. It was a weight I carried for years. It wasn't long after that my father announced, "Let's start fresh. A new life begins for the 3 of us." He said this loud and clear, sticking his head out the window of the car, right in front of our grandparents' empty house. And then they drove away. My parents left me behind, laughing as they sped off, leaving me standing there, frozen. I was just 9 years old at the time, and all I could do was watch the car disappear, feeling completely abandoned. I'm Grace, and I'm 24 now. I have a twin brother, Daniel. We used to live together with our parents, but it's been over 9 years since we've been apart. The reason is tied to the past we both shared, a past I can't easily forget. Our family wasn't anything out of the ordinary. My father had a regular office job, and my mother worked part-time while also managing the house. Like any other family, we lived a simple life. But things started to change once we reached elementary school. That's when my brother's talents began to shine. He was naturally good at school, always expected to get perfect scores, and teachers couldn't stop praising him. "You're amazing, Daniel. Another perfect score. You're so talented and will go far in life," my mother would say with a proud smile, while my father would laugh, agreeing. He might become a scholar, a doctor, or even an athlete. He'll never have to worry about money. My brother was their pride, and it was clear to everyone. But me, I struggled. I couldn't focus in class. The sounds of chairs moving, the click of mechanical pencils, and other distractions made it hard for me to concentrate. I would get scolded regularly by teachers, and instead of being helped, I was often ignored. As the years went by, my parents seemed to shower all their attention on Daniel. His favorite foods were always on the table. He was the one who went out with them for fun, and if he wanted something, it was always granted. Meanwhile, I was left to fend for myself, neglected in a way that was hard for me to express. If I had been able to talk to someone back then, perhaps things could have changed. But I couldn't. I struggled to speak, to put my thoughts into words. I couldn't explain how I felt or why I was struggling. Even as an adult, I still find it hard to communicate clearly. Sometimes, when I think I'm answering a question or giving a response, I end up saying something irrelevant, missing the point completely. I've gotten better, but the struggle never really goes away. According to my mother, I was born with a mild developmental disorder. While I've grown and learned more over the years, I still face difficulties that others might not understand. As a child, I was often difficult to handle. But just because I was different doesn't mean I deserved to be neglected. I was still growing, still learning, and still deserving of love and care, just like anyone else. My parents, however, didn't see it that way. They would often look down on me, comparing me to my brother, who they saw as perfect in every way. I could have stood up for myself and tried to defend my worth, but back then, my parents held all the power. I couldn't argue with them, so I kept quiet. I smiled, even when it hurt, and didn't fight back. As I got older, my relationship with my brother started to change too. When we were younger, we were close. But as he grew, he became more distant. He didn't understand me anymore. "Don't talk to me at school," he'd say. "It's good we don't look alike." I wouldn't want anyone to think we're related. His words hurt, but I couldn't say anything back. He saw me as nothing more than a burden. He began to ignore me completely, and the kindness that once existed between us faded away. My parents never noticed how Daniel treated me. They never cared, and they certainly never paid attention to the way they treated me either. Slowly, over time, I became invisible to them. No more attention, no more affection. I was just there. Now, as I reflect on the past, I realize how much it shaped me. It's been a long road, but I'm learning to stand on my own. Even though I was neglected, misunderstood, and often overlooked, I've come to understand that I deserve better. I am not just a side character in someone else's story. I'm the author of my own life, and it's time for me to write a new chapter. My days were reduced to just waiting for the rare moments when I would receive any attention, and even then it was minimal. Special occasions like birthdays and Christmas felt the same. My parents would take my brother out to eat, but for me, there was nothing special. No birthday cake, no treats, no gifts. Instead, I would get a supermarket meal, prepackaged and discounted. I was left alone, stuck with the task of house-sitting while my brother enjoyed the attention. Even during the New Year celebrations, it was no different. My father would tell me, "You stay in your room. I can't concentrate with you around." So, my New Year's celebration consisted of eating snacks in my room, listening to the sounds of laughter and cheer from the living room, and feeling more isolated than ever. When it came to study materials, my parents would dismiss me completely. You don't need any study materials. What's the point? You can't do anything anyway. They said it so matter-of-factly, as if I didn't matter. Only my brother was given a desk, educational materials, and the chance to succeed. I felt defeated. With no encouragement at home, my grades began to drop, and I lost all motivation to study. It felt like I had no place, not at school, not at home. But there were two people I could rely on, two adults who treated me with kindness, my grandparents. They lived far away, over 4 hours by car, so I couldn't see them often. But twice a year, during the summer and holiday breaks, I was allowed to go visit them. The rule was simple. I wasn't allowed to speak. Still, those trips meant everything to me. Their house was nestled in beautiful countryside, far removed from the hustle and bustle of the city. To my brother and parents, it might have seemed boring, but to me, it was a paradise. The vibrant colors of nature fascinated me, and while my brother buried himself in his studies, I would sit with my colored pencils and draw. I would sketch what I saw in the countryside, trying to capture the beauty on paper. My brother would scoff, and my parents would glance at my drawings with disdain, but my grandparents were different. They hung my simple drawings on the refrigerator, praising them. "What a beautiful sunset you've drawn," they would say, and at that moment, I felt understood. Not because my art was amazing, but because they saw the effort I put into expressing myself, even if I couldn't find the words. They loved my brother, of course, but they didn't treat me any differently. They treated us both the same, showing love equally. Those rare visits with my grandparents were my emotional refuge, the only time I felt truly seen and valued. Then, when we were 9 years old, just as spring break began, my parents shocked us with an unexpected announcement. "We've sold our apartment," my father declared. My brother laughed mockingly. "You're really stupid. It's been sold. A new life awaits us in a new house." I was confused. If the house is sold, where are we going to live? What about school? When are we moving? My questions were met with anger from my father. "Shut up. Your questions are always pointless. We've been preparing for this for a long time. Pack your things quickly." I hadn't noticed it until then, but the living room was already packed up. I had been so isolated in my room that I hadn't seen the gradual disappearance of things around the house. Panicking, I held back tears as I quickly packed my things into cardboard boxes. But I could only take a few toys and the bare minimum of clothes. Most of what I owned were things I had brought home from school, and I hastily packed them up, trying to stay calm. "I'm ready," I said, my voice barely a whisper, as I stood with my school bag. "Everything's packed." But my father wasn't interested in my efforts. "Forget about your report cards. Just get in the car quickly," he snapped, tossing my box roughly into the trunk. The harshness of the moment stung, but I didn't protest. There was no point. My life felt like it was being packed up, discarded, and tossed away, just like the things in that box. I climbed into the car, holding my school bag tightly. Something felt different, though. My brother Daniel, who always sat next to me, was nowhere to be seen. "Where's Daniel?" I asked, feeling confused. "It can't just be the three of us going, right? Aren't we missing something?" My mother shot me a sharp look. "You're supposed to be quiet in the car," she snapped. I fell silent, my confusion only growing. "It's hard to understand you," she muttered. "We gave your brother some pocket money and let him go out to play. Be quiet if you understand." I didn't know what to think. As I stared out of the car window, I absent-mindedly watched the trees, their flowers blooming beautifully. But then, a small spark of hope flickered in my heart. Maybe, just like in the past when they took only Daniel out, this time they were taking me somewhere fun. Maybe this was their way of surprising me with the move. I smiled to myself, the excitement growing. My parents were talking softly to each other, but I didn't pay attention. I was too caught up in the idea that this trip could be something special for me. I never imagined that this happiness would soon be replaced with betrayal. Eventually, I fell asleep. Suddenly, I was jolted awake by my mother's loud voice. "Wake up, take your school bag, and get out of the car." Groggy and disoriented, I stepped out of the car. And then I froze. my heart skipping a beat. We were in front of my grandparents' house, the house I loved so much. "Yay, Grandma, Grandpa," I said, rushing to the door with excitement. But when I tried to open it, it wouldn't budge. The door was locked. "Mom, I can't get in," I said, confused. "Oh, it's a weekday today," my mother replied dismissively. "They're probably still at work. I just called them. They'll be back soon. See you." She didn't even look at me as she grabbed my luggage and tossed it in front of the door. She turned right back to the car without a second glance.
Wait.
"Where are you going?" I called out, feeling the panic rising in my chest.
Mom, Dad.
"Where are you going?" My mother shook me off like it was nothing. "Your brother got into a famous private elementary school. It guarantees that he'll progress through every grade. He's already set to transfer there next term. We sold the apartment to pay for his tuition, and we're moving to a new house for him. But having you around only distracts him. It also adds extra food costs." She paused, looking at me with a cold expression. "This is your chance to stay here. Just stay with your grandparents." Wait, what's going on? Am I changing schools? Am I going to a different school? My mind was spinning. "That's exactly what annoys me about you," my mother snapped, raising her voice. "You're always causing trouble. You're a burden to me. Your grades are terrible, your appearance is below average, and you can't even have a proper conversation. Your brother is such a good kid. Why do you always make things difficult?" Her words felt like a slap, leaving me speechless. I could barely breathe, much less find the right words to respond. "Did I do something bad?" I asked quietly, almost choking on the words. "If I did, I'm sorry. I don't need your apologies. They're just empty words." My mother's voice was sharp. "If I had known about your developmental disorder, I never would have had you. You're an unnecessary burden on our family." When she said this, it felt like the ground beneath me had vanished. I was overwhelmed by the weight of her words. My world went completely dark. "We're leaving now. A new life begins for the three of us," my father said loudly, sticking his head out of the car window. His voice was final, unyielding. I stood there, frozen, desperate to stop them, to make them see me, to make them understand. "Don't go," I pleaded. "Please don't leave me behind." "Dad, Mom, am I such a bad child?" My mind was a whirlwind, and the words just wouldn't come out right. I couldn't express how much this hurt, how much I needed them to stay. As I struggled to speak, my mother glanced at me coldly and turned toward the car. "Sorry to keep you waiting," she said. "Since we're here, we'll buy a cake from the bakery and take it home to Daniel. You can eat it with him." All I could do was stand there, staring, as they drove away without a second thought. "Grace, are you okay?" I heard a voice, soft and kind. I turned to see my grandparents standing in front of me, their faces filled with concern. By the time I realized what had happened, it had already gotten dark. My world felt so empty. I had been abandoned again, left behind as if I didn't matter. But at that moment, as I looked into my grandparents' worried eyes, I realized that at least someone cared. Even if my parents had cast me aside, they were still here, and that small comfort was the only thing keeping me from falling apart completely. While I waited for my grandparents to come back, I must have fallen asleep without even realizing it. I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. My grandfather noticed right away. "Your hands are cold, and your face is so pale," he said, wrapping me in his jumper. Gently, he lifted me onto his back and carried me to a warm room. I could feel the warmth starting to spread through me, but my mind was still too clouded to understand everything. My grandparents were moving quickly around the house, speaking to each other in tones that were full of concern and anger. "How long has Grace been waiting out there?" they exclaimed when they saw the message on their phones at work. They were shocked to find out what had happened. The message simply read, "We've left Grace in front of the house. Please take care of her." My grandparents rushed home immediately. If they hadn't found me when they did, I don't even want to imagine what could have happened. At that time, my grandfather worked as a craftsman and my grandmother worked tirelessly at a local restaurant. They were both always so busy. Yet, my parents didn't let them know in advance what was going on. They sent that brief message, and that was it. No further explanation, no concern for how I was doing. The realization that my parents didn't care enough to inform my grandparents ahead of time hit me like a cold wave, reminding me of how insignificant I was to them. As I sipped the hot milk my grandmother gave me, I felt the warmth seep into my chest. It calmed my racing thoughts, and I couldn't hold back the tears any longer. My grandmother gently stroked my back, offering comfort as I cried. Meanwhile, my grandfather stood up abruptly and called my father. The conversation grew heated, and I could hear the frustration in his voice. Eventually, he slammed the phone down, his anger boiling over. "Grace, I spoke with your father, but it seems we can't communicate properly," he said, his voice softening as he turned to me. "Can you tell me what happened?" Tears streamed down my face as I tried to explain everything that had led up to this moment. My words were jumbled and scattered, my emotions making it hard to speak clearly. But my grandparents listened quietly, never interrupting, never judging. I finally choked out the words. They said I'm an unnecessary existence because I have a developmental disorder. They said it would have been better if I had never been born. Mom and Dad want to create a new family with Daniel. As I spoke, I felt the weight of those harsh words pressing down on me. But then, without warning, I was wrapped in a tight, comforting embrace by my grandmother. "What are you talking about?" she said softly. "You are a wonderful child, no matter what anyone says. You are irreplaceable to us. We're so happy you were born." Her words were like a balm to my broken heart. "People's worth isn't measured by intelligence or appearance," she continued, her voice steady. "Your grandfather and I are just ordinary people. We didn't attend prestigious schools, but we lived our lives doing what we loved. You may not be great at academics, but you have a rare talent for sensitivity and expression. That's something no one else has. That's uniquely yours." I felt a wave of relief wash over me, and the tears started to flow again, but this time they weren't born from sadness. My grandparents had shown me something I had forgotten, that I had worth, that I wasn't just a burden. "There are no adults here to make you feel sad anymore. You don't have to worry," my grandfather added, rubbing my head gently. "I'm sorry we didn't notice it sooner. You've been doing your best." I cried in their arms, overwhelmed with emotion, but it was different now. Their love and support helped me begin to heal. From that moment on, I began living with my grandparents. They enrolled me in a small, local elementary school where the teachers were kind and understanding. One of them, in particular, became the first person, aside from my grandparents, who understood me. Because the school was in a rural area with only a few students, the teachers were able to implement a personalized educational program that took into account my unique characteristics. They helped me move through lessons at my own pace, which made all the difference. As a result, my grades, which had once been poor, began to improve. I struggled with communication, but slowly I came to accept that my uniqueness was not something to be ashamed of. I started to make friends, and I began to live a much more peaceful, balanced life, both mentally and physically. I even started to find things I truly wanted to do, and over time, I found my passions. 14 years passed, and during all that time, I never heard from my parents or my brother. Their addresses and phone numbers changed, and slowly, their faces faded from my memory. I had moved on with my life, found a new family with my grandparents, and built a future for myself. But then, one day, it all came crashing back. "Open the door. You're in there, aren't you?" The sound of someone banging violently on the door shattered the peaceful calm of the early morning. My grandparents had already woken up, but I froze, unsure of what was happening. My heart raced as the noise grew louder, each thud more urgent than the last. I had no idea who it was, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever was about to happen would change everything again. I woke up groggy, disoriented, and unsure of what was going on. My grandfather's angry voice cut through the fog in my mind. "After leaving your daughter for over a decade, what do you want now?" His tone made me freeze. Slowly, I walked toward the entrance, confusion clouding my thoughts. When I stepped outside, my eyes widened in shock. There, Standing in front of me was the woman who had given birth to me, but she didn't look anything like the mother I remembered. The woman in front of me looked tired and worn out, as if life had taken its toll. Beside her stood a man who looked different too. The once slim figure of my father had given way to a man with a bulging belly. They smiled, reaching out their hands toward me, trying to act friendly. I stiffened. My eyes narrowed. If you are my parents, why are you here? Don't act like we're strangers. We came to talk, my mother said, her voice dripping with a false sweetness. Yes, we know the workshop is doing well now. Your dad's getting older, and as both a manager and craftsman, he's reaching his limits.
So, we've come back.
I thought I'd take over the business. We also heard that our lovely daughter is set to inherit from him, and we think that should be ours to take. My grandfather snorted in disbelief at their words, his voice full of disdain. Oh, so you've come back for the leftovers and to take over the business? How presumptuous. An amateur with no understanding of glass artistry wanted to take over our workshop. We've already decided who our successor will be, and it's Grace. She will take over. She's a genius. My father's face twisted with disbelief. What? This child? She can't do anything.
He scoffed.
Before I could react, my grandmother threw a newspaper at his face. What are you doing? Look inside, you fool, she said, pointing to the paper with her finger. My father flipped through the pages quickly, his eyes growing wide as he alternated between looking at me and the article in shock. It was an article from a recent interview, Young Glass Artisan from a Local Workshop to the World. The headline blared across the page. When I was in middle school, I started to take an interest in my grandfather's work. At first, I was just an assistant in his workshop, but as time went on, I became more involved. Eventually, my grandfather recognized my talent and took me on as an apprentice. I was fascinated by the idea of capturing the beauty of nature through glass, and over the years, my passion grew. A few years ago, I completed a piece that had been my dream to create, and after I began selling it, it gained popularity on social media. Quickly, I became known as a prominent glass artisan. Now, I even receive orders from restaurants and stores abroad. We expanded the workshop and started online sales. You are indeed our daughter, my father said, his voice now laced with exaggerated praise. Not like that useless, timid son. I blinked in confusion. Useless, timid? Those words were so opposite to the brother I remembered. I turned to my mother, trying to make sense of what she was saying. She glared at me. Just listen. That useless Daniel, she began, speaking with a strange excitement. He graduated from university and got a job at a top company. Everything was going well at first. But after years of being praised as perfect, he became arrogant and fragile. Just a little scolding and he quit his job. Can you believe it? He quit after just a year. Now, he mostly stays in his room. He barely leaves except for the bathroom or shower. We had to quit our jobs because of him. I was stunned. This was not the brother I remembered, the brother who once seemed so promising, so full of potential. It was hard to reconcile this version of him with the one I once knew. Hey, Dad, my father said, shifting the conversation. Forget the inheritance for a moment. You have money, right? Can't you take care of us three? Or at least just us two? My grandfather stared at him, incredulous. Do you two only care about yourselves? Daniel's still young. He'll figure something out. He's not a child anymore. But for us, it's impossible to find new jobs at our age. Hey, Dad, listen to your loving son's request, my father persisted. My grandfather, dumbfounded, sighed deeply and walked back into the house. As I stood there in shock, my mother turned to me, her eyes bloodshot and tired. You should come live with us, too, right? Oh, wait. You don't understand what we're talking about. She spoke in a tone that made my heart sink. All you have to do is nod along. My father nodded in agreement, but his expression was blank. I felt my blood run cold. I could barely process the words that came next. Why do I have to live with strangers? I asked, my voice trembling but firm. We are your real parents. My mother's voice was harsh, her anger rising. We raised you. I stared at them, trying to make sense of the twisted version of my family that had reappeared after all these years. I had been left behind, forgotten, and now they wanted to pick up where they had left off as if no time had passed. As if all the pain they had caused didn't matter. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face the people who had so easily discarded me once before, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to be pushed around again. When I was a child living with my parents, I never felt truly cared for. It was as if I barely existed in their world. They didn't see me, and they certainly didn't make me feel loved. It was my grandparents and my teachers who were the ones to raise me, to nurture me, to guide me when I had no one else. They were the ones who truly cared for me when my parents couldn't or wouldn't. As I stood there, facing my biological parents, I felt nothing but a cold distance. I looked at them, and they seemed like strangers. I had no memories of them caring for me, no recollection of the warmth and affection that parents should show their children. They had abandoned me when I was just 9 years old. "You may be my parents by law," I said, my voice calm yet firm, "but I have no memory of that. I can't live with strangers." The silence in the room was thick as I waited for their response, but none came. My grandparents, who had always been my true family, didn't say anything either, but their quiet presence made me feel supported. The look on their faces, their silence, told me all I needed to know. They were on my side, as always. My father, clearly frustrated, looked at my grandfather and muttered, "Don't you think that's a terrible thing to say? Dad? Say something." My grandfather simply smiled, his calmness a stark contrast to my father's mounting anger. My father pressed on, his voice rising, "If you want me to, I'll say something too. It's strange to say you raised Grace when you abandoned her at 9. "No, not about me," my father said, stumbling over his words. "Say something to Grace. Say something to your grandfather. Say something to her." My grandfather, undisturbed by the tension, chuckled softly. "Don't abandon us now," he said, his tone light. Frustrated and clearly losing his composure, my father tried again. "Hey, Dad, enough already." My grandfather interrupted with a stern voice that rang through the room. His words were final, and they cut through the chaos. "Why would you say such spoiled things now?" The room fell into an uncomfortable silence, and my parents froze. In the quiet that followed, my grandmother hurried off to the kitchen. When she returned, she held a large bag in her hand. "This is perfect," she said with a steady voice.
"Now, get out."
"You bad luck." With that, my grandmother began tossing salt at my mother's face. My mother cried out, "Ouch. What is this?" "This salt," my grandmother explained calmly, "is for cooking. Parents who abandon their children are the epitome of bad luck." She continued to throw the salt, her motion unhurried and deliberate. "Go back already," my grandmother shouted. "I'll keep throwing salt until you leave. We have plenty of it, so be prepared." Beside her, my grandfather stood, holding a new bag of salt. He joined in, tossing the salt with force, hitting my parents directly in the face.
"Hey, Dad. Mom, please stop."
My parents cried, their voices pleading, but my grandparents didn't stop. They continued their silent assault, their faces set in determination. "Go back already. Never come back," they yelled. My parents, desperate and confused, clung to my hand, begging me, "Are you going to abandon your parents? We're drowning in debt. We're struggling to survive. Shouldn't family help us out?" I pulled my hand free from their grip, my voice steady but cold. "My family is only my grandparents," I replied, my words sharp. With one firm motion, I took the bag of salt from my grandmother and emptied its contents over my parents. This moment, this act felt decisive. It was my way of severing the final ties that had held me to them. "Goodbye forever," I said, watching as they recoiled in shock, their faces filled with disbelief. Without another word, they fled the house, running away as if they had nothing left to hold on to. As time passed, my brother appeared at our workshop. It turned out that when my parents had fled, the debt collectors had been chasing them, and in the chaos, they had left Daniel behind. The debt collectors came to our house and evicted my brother, leaving him distraught and alone. The police took him in, And when they contacted our grandparents as his only remaining relatives, my grandfather proposed a solution. "One who does not work does not eat," he said matter-of-factly. "If you work hard and help out in the workshop, we'll provide you with a place to live and meals. What do you say?" To my surprise, my brother agreed without hesitation. Despite his earlier success, the weight of reality had knocked him down. He started working in the workshop, but it was clear he was still unpolished. My grandfather didn't sugarcoat things. He often scolded Daniel, pushing him to do better, to improve. But as always, my grandfather's guidance was steady, and under his watchful eye, Daniel slowly began to learn the value of hard work. It was a new beginning for him, but one that would take time and patience. As time went on, my brother began to change. At first, he was just a worker in the workshop, struggling to find his place. But soon, he started showing talent in areas like online sales and accounting. His skills became invaluable to the workshop, and he quickly became indispensable. Over time, my brother, who had grown up so differently, began to reflect on his past actions. He started to feel ashamed of how he had treated me before, and he began to acknowledge my abilities. It was a strange feeling, and I can't say we've fully reconciled yet, but it's both delightful and a bit embarrassing to see him treating me kindly now. I never expected this change, but it's a step forward, even if it's just the beginning of a new understanding between us. Just when it seemed like my brother was finding his place and being recognized for his efforts, something unexpected happened. Our parents reached out to him as if nothing had changed. "Daniel, where are you? What are you doing? It's getting dangerous here. We might end up on a fishing boat. Please help us," they pleaded. Their message focused entirely on their own problems, completely ignoring what they had done to my brother in the past and how they had left him behind without a second thought. It was too much for Daniel. He had finally started to make a life for himself, and their selfishness was the last straw. Without hesitation, he changed all his phone numbers and email addresses, cutting off all means of contact with them. It was his way of protecting himself from their constant chaos. I often wonder if they've ended up working on a fishing boat, as they mentioned, but I have no desire to find out. In truth, both my brother and I felt a great sense of relief after severing ties with our parents. We no longer had to worry about their unpredictable and selfish behavior. Instead, we could focus on building our own lives. Now, the dinner table is surrounded by people who truly care for us. My grandparents, my brother, and I may not have fancy dishes, but there's something so comforting about the warmth we share. The food might not be extravagant, but there's mashed potatoes made by my grandmother and a slightly misshapen dish made by my brother. My grandfather enjoys his beer from a glass that I made, and for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm surrounded by love and stability. It's a simple life, but it's a life I never had as a child, and for the first time, I'm experiencing a happiness I thought was beyond my reach. I've found a sense of peace that I never knew before, and it's all thanks to the people who truly care about me.